Hi everyone, welcome back. If you're seeking calm, deep rest, and peaceful sleep, you're in the right place. Let's begin.
Welcome, friend, to another journey together. Tonight, we will uncover ancient wisdom that holds the keys to transforming anxiety and overthinking into the deep, peaceful sleep your soul craves. If you'd like, feel free to share what time it is and where you're listening from. Your mind has been running all day. You're exhausted, not just from the day, but from thinking itself. The constant mental chatter that never seems to stop, even when your body desperately needs rest. Tonight, that changes. As you settle into rest, you'll discover what ancient masters have known for centuries about the restless mind and the profound peace that lies beneath it. Through lost tales that have guided people for over 1,000 years and gentle wisdom that dissolves anxiety at its very source, you'll learn something that might surprise you. Peace doesn't come from fixing your thoughts or controlling your mind. It comes from understanding why thoughts arise in the first place and learning to relate to them differently. The journey you're about to take isn't about adding more techniques to your life or giving you more things to remember. It's about rediscovering something you already possess but may have forgotten. A natural capacity for rest that exists beneath all the mental noise. A stillness that doesn't need to be created because it's already here, waiting patiently for you to stop covering it with endless thinking. There was once a merchant named Chen who lived in a prosperous trading city along the ancient Silk Road. Chen was successful by every measure his culture valued. Traders from distant provinces knew his name. His children attended the best schools. His wife wore robes made from the finest fabrics he imported. By any external standard, Chen had achieved the kind of life that others could only dream of. But Chen carried a burden that no amount of gold could lift. His mind never stopped working. Each dawn brought the same ritual. Chen would wake before sunrise, but his mind was already hours ahead, racing through the day's potential problems. What if the caravan carrying his silk shipment encounters bandits in the mountain passes? What if the monsoon rains arrive early and flood the warehouse district? What if his main competitor has discovered a new trade route that will undercut his prices? By the time Chen's feet touched the cold wooden floor of his bedchamber, he had already mentally lived through 10 different disasters and begun crafting elaborate plans to prevent each one. Chen's success had come from his ability to plan ahead, to anticipate problems, to think 3 moves ahead of his competitors. This mental agility had made him wealthy. But somewhere along the way, his useful skill had transformed into a relentless compulsion. His wife began to express concern. "Chen," she would say gently, finding him hunched over his scrolls and account books at midnight, the air thick with the smell of ink and lamp oil, "come to bed. The numbers will be the same tomorrow. Your calculations can wait until morning." But Chen felt trapped by his own thoughts. "Just 1 more hour," he would promise, both to her and to himself. "I need to finish reviewing these shipping manifests. I need to plan for the seasonal variations. I need to think through the implications of the new trade agreements." He genuinely believed that 1 more hour of mental effort would finally bring him the security and certainty he craved. Perhaps you recognize something of yourself in Chen's struggle. The mind that won't quiet even when the body yearns for rest. The thoughts that circle like birds that have forgotten how to land anywhere. the exhausting mental labor that promises security but delivers only more anxiety. Chen's story is not unique to ancient China or to merchants. It's the story of anyone whose mind has learned to spin without knowing how to stop. One morning, as Chen sat in his shop surrounded by the familiar sounds and smells of commerce, he overheard a conversation between two customers that would change everything. They were discussing a Buddhist master who lived in a simple temple on the mountainside above the city. This master, they said, was known throughout the region for something that immediately captured Chen's desperate attention. He slept peacefully every night. Not because his life was free from problems or responsibilities. The master dealt with the daily challenges of running a temple, guiding students, and serving his community. But he had learned something Chen had forgotten, or perhaps never known. He had learned the difference between useful thinking and mental spinning, between planning and panic, between appropriate concern and compulsive worry. The customers spoke of visiting the master during times of difficulty and finding not complex teachings or elaborate rituals, but a quality of presence that was both deeply restful and surprisingly practical. "He doesn't give you answers," one said. "He shows you something better, how to find clarity that doesn't depend on having all the answers." That very afternoon, Chen made a decision that broke his routine for the first time in months. He closed his shop early, something that would have been unthinkable just days before, and began the winding journey up the mountain path that led to the temple. The walk itself was a revelation. Chen had lived in sight of these mountains his entire life, but he couldn't remember the last time he had really looked at them. As he climbed the rocky trail, the air grew cooler and cleaner with each step. Ancient pine trees lined the path, their branches moving gently in the mountain breeze, creating patterns of light and shadow on the dusty ground. The air carried scents Chen had forgotten existed, the clean smell of stone, the green fragrance of moss growing in shaded crevices, the sweet perfume of wildflowers that bloomed in hidden meadows. For the first few minutes of the climb, Chen's mind continued its familiar patterns. He found himself calculating how much business he might lose by closing early, rehearsing what he would say to the master, wondering whether this trip was a practical use of his time. But something about the physical rhythm of walking, combined with the beauty of his surroundings, began to work on him like medicine. His breathing, which had been shallow and slightly rushed for so many months that he'd forgotten what normal breathing felt like, began to deepen and slow. His steps found a steady rhythm that didn't require conscious management. The mountain path demanded just enough attention to navigate safely, but not so much that his mind could spin off into its usual elaborate scenarios. By the time Chen reached the temple, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in soft colors that shifted from gold to rose to purple. The temple was simpler than he had expected, not the elaborate complex he had imagined, but a modest wooden building that seemed to grow naturally from the mountainside. Wind chimes made of bamboo hung from the eaves, creating a gentle melody that mixed with the sound of water flowing over stones somewhere nearby. Chen had expected to find formal gates, impressive statuary, perhaps a test of his worthiness, or a complex ritual of approach. Instead, when he knocked on the simple wooden door, it opened to reveal an elderly monk whose face was weathered like old leather, but whose eyes held a clarity that reminded Chen of mountain lakes, deep, still, and somehow refreshing just to look into. The master didn't ask Chen to explain his purpose or justify his visit. He simply smiled with what seemed like genuine pleasure at having a visitor and invited him to sit on a plain woven cushion in the temple's main hall. The space was sparse but welcoming. Afternoon light filtered through paper screens, creating a soft golden glow. The air smelled faintly of incense and the wood smoke from a small cooking fire somewhere deeper in the building. Tea was already prepared, steaming gently in simple clay cups that looked handmade. The master poured for both of them with movements that were economical but graceful, like someone who had performed this action thousands of times with complete attention each time. "You look tired," the master said, and Chen was struck by how the observation was made without judgment, just a simple noting of what was obviously true. The words hit Chen with unexpected force. He realized he couldn't remember the last time anyone had simply seen him, rather than seeing his function as a successful merchant. He nodded, feeling the weight of exhaustion he had been carrying for so long that it had become invisible to him. Not just physical tiredness, but a deep weariness that lived in his bones, in his mind, in his spirit. "When did you last notice your breath?" the master asked, lifting his teacup with both hands and inhaling the fragrant steam. The question seemed strange, almost irrelevant to Chen's concerns. "My breath? It's always there. I don't need to think about it. It just happens automatically while I focus on important things." The master nodded thoughtfully. "Yes, it happens automatically. But do you feel it? Right now, as we speak, air is moving in and out of your body. Cool mountain air entering through your nose, warm air leaving your lips. But your attention is somewhere else, isn't it? Even now, even here." Chen shifted slightly on his cushion and realized with surprise that the master was completely correct. Even in this peaceful setting, even while consciously trying to be present for this important conversation, his mind was elsewhere. Part of his attention was back in his shop, wondering whether he had properly secured the valuable silk inventory before leaving. Another part was already planning tomorrow's activities, mentally reviewing the list of tasks that would be waiting for him. His body was in the temple, but his mind was scattered across time and space like leaves blown by an endless wind. "Your mind," the master continued gently, "has learned to live everywhere except where your body is. It lives in yesterday's regrets and tomorrow's worries. It lives in imaginary conversations and hypothetical problems. But your breath lives only here, only now. It cannot exist in the past because that breath is already gone. It cannot exist in the future because that breath hasn't come yet." The master demonstrated by taking a slow, conscious breath. Chen watched his chest rise and fall with natural rhythm. "Feel your breath now," the master said quietly. "Don't try to change it or control it. Don't make it deeper or slower or different in any way. Just feel it as it is, like noticing something familiar that you had temporarily forgotten." Chen closed his eyes and tried to follow the instruction. He became aware of cool air entering through his nostrils, filling his lungs, then warm air flowing back out. For a moment, there were no trade routes to plan, no inventory to calculate, no competitors to worry about. Just the simple, ancient rhythm of breathing that had been sustaining him every moment of his life, usually without his notice or appreciation. But within seconds, Chen's mind wandered away from the breath and back to next week's grain shipment. Would the weather hold? Had he negotiated favorable enough terms? Should he hedge his position with additional suppliers? The master noticed the shift immediately. Chen's breathing had become shallow again. His face had tightened with the familiar expression of mental effort. "Where did you go?" the master asked with what sounded like friendly curiosity rather than criticism. "I'm sorry," Chen said, opening his eyes. I was thinking about business matters. My mind just went there automatically. Of course it did, the master said, refilling Chen's teacup. Your mind has been practicing going there for years. It's become very skilled at leaving the present moment. But right now, the grain shipment exists only in your imagination. Your breath exists in reality. The master paused to take another sip of tea, seeming to give each swallow his complete attention. Tell me, which one can actually help you in this moment? Your breath, which is here and real, or your worry about grain, which is imaginary and distant? The question struck Chen like a bell being rung in a quiet room. His breath was real, immediate, accessible. It was filling his lungs with mountain air that smelled of pine and stone. His worry about the grain shipment was a mental construction, a story about something that might or might not happen in a future that didn't exist yet. Your merchant mind, the master continued, has learned valuable skills. Planning ahead, anticipating problems, thinking strategically, these abilities have served you well. But like any tool, when it never stops working, it wears itself out. And it wears you out too. Chen felt this truth in his tired shoulders, perpetually raised as if bracing for unseen blows. In his aching head, tight from months of constant mental tension. In the knot that had taken up permanent residence in his stomach, a physical manifestation of chronic worry that he had learned to ignore but that never actually went away. Try again, the master said patiently. Just one breath from beginning to end. Let everything else wait for this one breath. Chen closed his eyes and returned his attention to breathing. This time he stayed with it a bit longer, feeling the coolness of inhaled air, the pause at the top of the breath, the warmth of the exhale. For those few seconds, his mind was unified around a single, simple experience. No division between observer and observed, no commentary running in the background, no planning or analyzing. Just breathing. When the breath ended, Chen opened his eyes and looked at the master with something approaching wonder. That was peaceful. But my mind will start thinking again. It always does. The master's eyes crinkled with what looked like delight. Of course, it will start thinking again. Thinking isn't wrong. Your mind isn't broken. But when thinking becomes spinning, when planning becomes panic, when your mind never allows itself to rest, then you suffer. Not because life is inherently difficult, but because you're carrying tomorrow's burdens today. The master reached for the teapot and poured himself another cup, the action seemingly requiring no effort or thought, just natural responsiveness to the moment's needs. Your breath doesn't worry about tomorrow's breathing. Your heart doesn't spend time planning next week's heartbeat. They do their work completely, then rest completely. Your mind can learn this same natural rhythm. As these words settled into Chen's awareness, he began to understand something he had never considered before. His body was already demonstrating perfect wisdom about work and rest, tension and relaxation, effort and ease. His heart beat steadily without his conscious management. His digestive system processed food without his supervision. His immune system fought off threats without his strategic planning. An entire universe of intelligence was operating flawlessly within him, following natural rhythms of activity and rest. Only his thinking mind had forgotten how to stop working. The master and Chen sat in comfortable silence as the light outside gradually dimmed from gold to deep blue. Chen found himself noticing things he usually rushed past, the way the tea warmed his hands through the clay cup, the subtle sound of his own breathing, the feeling of sitting still without needing to be anywhere else or do anything else. "But what about my business?" Chen finally asked, giving voice to the fear that lurked beneath his willingness to experiment with presence. "If I stop constantly planning and anticipating problems, won't everything fall apart? Isn't my success based on staying ahead of potential difficulties?" The master smiled, and Chen got the impression this was not the first time he had heard this particular concern. "Tell me about your most successful business decisions," the master said. "The ones that brought you the greatest profit or opened the most beneficial opportunities. Did they come from worry, or did they come from clarity?" Chen considered this question seriously. As he reflected on his career's highlights, he realized something surprising. His best decisions had indeed come from moments of clarity, times when he could see a situation clearly and respond decisively. His worst decisions had come from anxiety and overthinking, when he had second-guessed himself into paralysis or had been so focused on preventing one problem that he had created others. "Plan when planning serves a purpose," the master continued. "Think when thinking is useful. But don't carry every problem all the time. Your mind needs rest, just like your body needs sleep. A well-rested mind makes better decisions than an exhausted one." They continued talking as the evening deepened around them. The master showed Chen simple ways to recognize when his thinking was helpful and when it had become compulsive. How to feel the difference in his body between appropriate concern and chronic anxiety. How to return to his breath as an anchor when his thoughts began their familiar spiral into imaginary futures. Most importantly, the master helped Chen understand that this wasn't about becoming less engaged with his life or less successful in his business. It was about bringing the same quality of presence that made his body function so well to his mental activities. Working fully when work was required, then resting completely when rest was appropriate. That night, Chen experienced something he had almost forgotten was possible. As he lay down to sleep in the simple guest quarters the master provided, his body settled into the bed like water finding its level. His breathing naturally deepened and slowed. When thoughts arose about the day's business or tomorrow's tasks, he gently returned his attention to the physical sensation of breathing, just as the master had taught him. For the first time in months, Chen slept deeply and peacefully. Not because all his problems had been solved, but because he had learned to set them down when it was time to rest. His mind, finally given permission to stop its constant vigilance, gratefully accepted the opportunity to restore itself. When morning came, Chen found himself more alert and clear-thinking than he had been in months. The problems he had been grinding away at mentally for weeks suddenly seemed more manageable. Solutions that had been obscured by anxiety became obvious. Decisions that had felt overwhelmingly complex resolved into simple choices. Chen spent several more days with the master, not learning complex techniques or memorizing elaborate teachings, but simply practicing the art of presence. Learning to work fully when work was required, then rest completely when rest was appropriate. Discovering that his mind, like his body, functioned better when it followed natural rhythms of engagement and release. When Chen finally returned to his city and his business, people noticed the change immediately. He moved with less urgency, but greater effectiveness. He listened more carefully and spoke more decisively. He seemed to have more time for everything, even though he was actually doing less mental spinning and more focused work. Chen's story teaches us something crucial about the anxious mind. Often our suffering doesn't come from our actual circumstances, but from the mental weight we add to those circumstances. We think about problems that may never occur. We replay conversations that are already finished. We try to control outcomes that haven't happened yet. We exhaust ourselves carrying mental burdens that have no substance outside our own imagination. But there's another way to live, the way Chen discovered in that mountain temple. A way that doesn't require us to stop engaging with life's genuine challenges, but simply to stop creating additional challenges through endless mental spinning. This way begins with the breath, not because breathing is mystical or magical, but because it's always available, always real, always happening in the present moment. Your breath is the most reliable anchor you have to what is actually occurring, rather than what you imagine might occur. Right now, as you rest, you can directly experience what Chen learned on that mountain. You don't need to understand everything about his story or remember all the details. You don't need to analyze the master's teachings or figure out how to implement them perfectly. You can simply notice your own breathing and let it demonstrate the wisdom that your body already knows, how to work when work is needed, and how to rest when rest is appropriate. Feel your breath now, just as Chen learned to do. Cool air entering, warm air leaving. No effort required, no management necessary. Your body is breathing itself with perfect intelligence, following rhythms that are millions of years old, demonstrating moment by moment how to be present with what is actually happening. This is where peace begins, not in solving all your problems or understanding everything perfectly, but in returning to the simple reality of what is here now. Your breath, your body, your immediate experience, freed from the endless commentary and projection that creates so much unnecessary suffering. Like Chen, you can learn to distinguish between useful thinking and mental spinning. You can discover how to engage fully with life's genuine demands while setting down the imaginary burdens that exist only in thought. You can find the rest that comes not from escaping your responsibilities, but from meeting them with the clarity that emerges when the mind is no longer exhausted by its own activity. The breath continues, steady and reliable, offering you moment by moment the same teaching that transformed Chen's life: how to be present, how to rest, how to find peace, not by changing your circumstances, but by changing your relationship to your own thinking. Tonight, let Chen's journey remind you that the peace you seek isn't hidden in some distant achievement or complex solution. It's as close as your next breath, as available as this very moment, as natural as your body's own wisdom about when to work and when to rest. Breathe now, and let the ancient teaching unfold directly through your own experience. Let your mind learn what your body already knows, that life is best lived not in constant preparation for imaginary futures, but in full engagement with the reality that is always, only now. Your body has been learning as you rest, absorbing the wisdom of Chen's story, not just mentally, but physically. Feel how your breathing has found its own deeper rhythm without your conscious direction. Notice how your shoulders have dropped slightly, how the tight places in your jaw and forehead have begun to soften. This is your body's natural intelligence responding to the invitation to let go. Chen's journey showed you how the breath can anchor awareness in the present moment, but there are deeper layers to explore. The body holds tensions and memories that thinking alone cannot reach. Tonight you'll discover how physical awareness can unlock doors to peace that the mind doesn't even know exist. There's an ancient truth woven through Buddhist teaching. The mind and body are not separate entities but one seamless whole. When the mind spins with anxiety, the body contracts in response. When the body releases tension, the mind naturally follows into stillness. This wisdom becomes medicine when you learn to listen to what your physical form is trying to tell you. Two monks were walking along a country road after the spring rains had turned the earth to thick, clinging mud. The older monk, Master Jin, moved with steady deliberation, his feet finding secure purchase despite the treacherous conditions. His brown robes, darkened with moisture from the mist, swayed gently with each measured step. The younger monk, Kenji, walked beside him with visible impatience, lifting his feet higher than necessary, trying to avoid the mud that inevitably clung to his sandals anyway. The road wound through rice paddies where farmers worked knee-deep in flooded fields, transplanting young green shoots that would eventually feed countless families. The air was thick with humidity and the rich scent of fertile earth. In the distance, mountains rose like sleeping giants beneath layers of grey cloud that promised more rain before evening. The two monks had been traveling since dawn, making their way to a monastery where they would spend several days in intensive meditation retreat. Kenji was eager to arrive, his mind already racing ahead to the teachings he hoped to receive, the insights he expected to gain, the spiritual progress he anticipated making. He walked as if trying to outpace time itself, his body tense with forward-moving energy. Master Jin, by contrast, seemed to inhabit each step fully. When his foot encountered a stone beneath the mud, he felt the hardness completely before shifting his weight. When a bird called from the flooded paddies, he received the sound without immediately categorizing or judging it. His presence was concentrated in the immediate experience of walking, neither hurrying toward the destination nor lagging behind in memory. They came to a place where the seasonal flooding had washed out a small wooden bridge that normally spanned a swift-moving stream. The water rushed past, brown with runoff from the mountain slopes, carrying twigs and leaves and foam from its tumultuous journey downhill. The current looked deceptively manageable from the bank, but both monks could see the power moving beneath the surface. Standing at the water's edge was a young woman dressed in an elegant silk kimono that had once been pristine white, with delicate blue flowers embroidered along the sleeves and hem. Now the beautiful garment was splattered with mud from her long walk, and her elaborate hair arrangement, which had clearly been styled with great care that morning, was beginning to come undone in the humid air. She looked up as the monks approached, relief flooding her face. "Honored teachers," she called out, bowing as deeply as her muddy skirts would allow. "I have been waiting here for hours, hoping someone would come. I must reach the village on the other side to see my grandmother, who has taken gravely ill. But the current is too strong for me to cross alone. I'm afraid I will be swept downstream." Her distress was genuine and immediate. Tears had carved clean tracks through the dust on her cheeks, and her hands trembled slightly as she gestured toward the rushing water. She was clearly far from home, travel-stained and weary, facing a barrier she could not overcome alone. Kenji looked at the woman, then at Master Jin, expecting his teacher to offer some words of comfort or perhaps suggest they help her find another crossing point downstream. What he did not expect was for Master Jin to stride directly into the water without a word. The older monk's movements were deliberate and sure as he waded into the current, testing each step carefully. When he reached the woman, he simply knelt in the shallow water at the bank and gestured for her to climb onto his back. She hesitated for just a moment, clearly aware of the social conventions that made such contact between strangers, especially between a woman and a monk, potentially scandalous. But necessity overruled propriety. She gathered her muddy skirts and climbed carefully onto Master Jin's back, wrapping her arms around his shoulders. He rose smoothly and began the crossing, his feet finding secure holds on the slippery stones beneath the rushing water. The current pushed against his legs with considerable force, but his balance remained centered and calm. Kenji watched from the bank with growing agitation. His teacher was violating one of their most basic monastic precepts, the rule against unnecessary physical contact with women. The entire philosophy of monastic life was built on creating boundaries that supported spiritual development, and here was Master Jin deliberately crossing one of the most important lines. The crossing took several careful minutes. Master Jin moved slowly but steadily, never rushing despite the water's urgency, never hesitating despite the obvious physical challenge. When they reached the opposite bank, he lowered himself again so the woman could climb down safely. She bowed deeply, her gratitude overflowing in words that tumbled over each other. "Thank you, honored teacher. You have saved my grandmother's last days. Your kindness will never be forgotten. May the Buddha bless you for your compassionate heart." Master Jin simply nodded and waded back across the stream to rejoin Kenji, who had been watching the entire interaction with increasing internal turmoil. The older monk's robes dripped steadily as he climbed out of the water, but his face showed no sign of concern about his actions or their consequences. The two monks resumed their journey in silence. But the silence was not the companionable quiet they had shared during the morning's walk. Now it was heavy with Kenji's unspoken judgment and confusion. His mind churned with questions and accusations that he dared not voice directly to his revered teacher. How could Master Jin have acted so thoughtlessly? Didn't he understand the sacred nature of their vows? What would other monks think if they heard about this incident? What kind of example was this setting? How could someone so advanced in spiritual practice make such an obvious error in judgment? As they walked, Kenji's internal dialogue grew more elaborate and heated. He replayed the scene at the river crossing again and again, each time finding new reasons to feel disturbed by his teacher's choice. He imagined the conversations that would take place when they reached the monastery. He rehearsed the arguments he might make about the importance of maintaining proper boundaries. He constructed detailed analyses of how Master Jin's action had violated not just the letter, but the spirit of monastic discipline. The physical act of carrying the woman had lasted less than 10 minutes, but in Kenji's mind it expanded to fill hours of mental commentary and emotional agitation. His body, which had begun the day with the normal tensions of travel, now carried additional weight, the weight of judgment, disapproval, and righteousness indignation. His shoulders hunched forward as if bracing against an invisible wind. His jaw clenched and released rhythmically as he mentally rehearsed the arguments he might make. His hands, swinging naturally at his sides during the peaceful morning walk, now formed partial fists that tightened and relaxed with the rhythm of his internal debate. Meanwhile, Master Jin walked with the same steady presence he had maintained all morning. The incident at the river had come and gone like weather, present when it was present, finished when it was finished. His attention remained available to the immediate experience of walking through the afternoon landscape. They paused for rest beside a clear mountain stream where the water ran shallow over smooth stones worn round by countless years of flow. Master Jin cupped his hands and drank deeply, then splashed water on his face and neck, washing away the sweat and dust of travel. He sat on a large boulder and gazed peacefully at the play of light on the moving water. Kenji could contain himself no longer. The words erupted from him like water bursting through a dam. "Master," he said, his voice tight with accusation and disappointment, How could you do that? We have taken sacred vows. We are not supposed to touch women, especially not carry them on our backs like pack animals. You broke our most fundamental rules in front of someone who will probably tell the entire village about the monks who don't follow their own teachings. Master Jin turned to look at his young companion with an expression of genuine surprise, as if he had forgotten about the river crossing entirely. His eyes held no defensiveness, no justification, just a kind of wondering curiosity. "I set that woman down at the river," he said simply. "But you're still carrying her." The words fell into the afternoon air like stones dropped into still water, creating ripples that spread outward in ever-widening circles of understanding. Kenji felt something shift inside his chest, as if a tight knot was beginning to loosen. The simple statement illuminated something he hadn't seen about his own mental processes. While Master Jin had responded fully to the situation at hand and then moved on, Kenji had picked up the event and carried it with him like a heavy pack, adding weight and commentary and emotional charge to something that was already completed. "I don't understand," Kenji said, though part of him was beginning to understand very clearly. "The woman needed help," Master Jin explained patiently. "I helped her. The help was given and received. It's finished. But you have been carrying that interaction with us for hours, adding your thoughts about it, your judgments about it, your worries about its implications. You're doing more work than I did and creating more suffering than the original situation contained." As these words settled into Kenji's awareness, he became conscious of how much physical tension he had been carrying since the river crossing. His neck ached from holding his head in a posture of disapproval. His shoulders burned from staying hunched in defensive readiness. His stomach was tight with the stress of internal conflict. "Feel your body," Master Jin suggested gently. "What is it holding on to right now?" Kenji closed his eyes and scanned through his physical form with attention he hadn't given it for hours. He discovered layer upon layer of tension that had nothing to do with the simple act of walking along a country road. His jaw was clenched so tightly that his temples ached. His hands were still forming partial fists. His breathing had become shallow and confined to the top of his chest. "This is what carrying looks like," Master Jin observed. "Not just in the mind, but in the body. You picked up my action and made it yours to worry about, judge, and analyze. Your body has been working to hold all that mental activity. But surely we should think about our actions and their consequences," Kenji protested, though his voice had lost its edge of righteous anger. "Yes," Master Jin agreed. "Reflection has its place. But there's a difference between thinking and carrying. I can reflect on my choice to help the woman, whether it was skillful, whether it served genuine compassion, whether it was appropriate to the circumstances. That kind of thinking serves understanding. But carrying the event like a burden, replaying it obsessively, using it to judge myself or others, that creates suffering without serving any useful purpose." Master Jin stood and began walking again, his movements as fluid and present as they had been all day. "Your body is wise," he said over his shoulder. "It knows the difference between useful effort and wasteful tension. It knows when you're carrying something that doesn't need to be carried." As they resumed their journey, Kenji began to experiment with what Master Jin had suggested. Instead of continuing to replay the river crossing incident, he brought his attention to his physical experience of walking. He felt his feet making contact with the muddy road. He noticed the rhythm of his breath, as it found its natural pace. He let his shoulders drop and his hands uncurl. The relief was immediate and profound. It was as if he had been carrying a heavy pack all day and had suddenly realized he could set it down. His step became lighter, his breathing deeper, his mind clearer. "How do I remember this?" Kenji asked as they walked. "How do I catch myself when I start carrying things that don't need to be carried? 0. 5. Your body will teach you," Master Jin replied. "It's always sending signals. When you start picking up mental burdens, your shoulders rise. Your jaw tightens. Your breathing becomes shallow. These are not just side effects of mental activity, they're intelligence. Your body is telling you when you're doing unnecessary work." They practiced this awareness for the remainder of their journey. When Kenji noticed his mind beginning to spin stories about the events of the day, he would check in with his body. Where was he holding tension? What was his breathing doing? How was he carrying himself through space? Each time he brought attention to his physical form, he discovered information that his thinking mind had missed. His body knew immediately when he was carrying unnecessary weight. It responded with gratitude and relief when he chose to set down mental burdens that served no practical purpose. By the time they reached the monastery that evening, Kenji had experienced a fundamental shift in his understanding of how mind and body work together. He realized that much of what he had been calling thinking was actually a form of physical labor, his body working to hold and carry mental constructions that had no substance outside his own imagination. The story of the two monks reveals something profound about how we create unnecessary suffering in our lives. Like Kenji, we often pick up experiences and carry them long after they're finished. We replay conversations from days ago, analyze interactions that are already complete, worry about implications of events that have already resolved themselves. Most of us don't realize that this mental carrying creates physical carrying as well. When your mind grips onto something, your body contracts to support that grip. When your thoughts become heavy with judgment or worry, your muscles tense to bear that weight. The mind's refusal to let go becomes the body's burden to bear. But your body, like Master Jin in the story, knows how to engage fully with what's needed and then release completely when the task is done. Your heart doesn't hold on to yesterday's heartbeats. Your lungs don't store last week's breaths. Your digestive system doesn't keep processing food that was already digested days ago. Only the thinking mind has learned to hoard experiences, carrying them forward like a collector who can never bear to throw anything away. And the body pays the price for this mental accumulation, holding tension and stress that has no real purpose in the present moment. Right now, as you rest, you can experience what Kenji discovered on that muddy road. You can scan through your body and notice where you might be carrying burdens that don't need to be carried. Where are you holding on to conversations from earlier today? What tensions are you maintaining about situations that are already resolved? Start with your feet and lower legs. Are they preparing to run somewhere even though you're lying still? Are your calves tight with readiness for action that isn't required right now? Let them soften and settle, trusting that they can respond appropriately when actual movement is needed. Feel your thighs and hips. This area often holds worry about stability and security, tension about whether you're safe or supported. Notice if there's gripping or bracing happening there, and see if you can let those muscles release their vigilance. You're safe right now, in this moment. Your body doesn't need to prepare for threats that exist only in imagination. Your lower back frequently carries the weight of responsibility, all the things you think you should be doing, fixing, or managing. Feel if there's tightness there, an arching or rigidity that comes from trying to hold up too much. Let your back settle into the surface beneath you, sharing that weight instead of bearing it alone. Your stomach and abdomen often clench around emotional material, anger you haven't expressed, sadness you haven't felt, fear you haven't acknowledged. This area can become like a closed fist, holding onto feelings that want to move through and be released. Breathe into your belly and see if you can let it soften, creating space for whatever wants to flow. The chest and heart region frequently armor themselves against potential hurt. You might be carrying tension from interactions where you felt misunderstood, unappreciated, or unloved. Feel if there's a protective hardening around your heart and experiment with letting that armor soften slightly. You don't have to become vulnerable to attack, just less defended against experiences that are already past. Your shoulders are probably carrying more than you realize. Like Kenji after the river crossing, you might be hunched against criticism, braced for additional burdens, raised in anticipation of stress that hasn't actually arrived. Let them drop away from your ears, widen across your back, release their protective posture. Your neck often holds the tension of trying to look in all directions at once, monitoring for problems, staying alert to potential issues, holding your head in readiness for whatever might come next. See if you can let your neck lengthen and soften, allowing your head to rest more fully. Even your face carries the imprint of your mental activity. Your jaw might be clenched around words you wish you had spoken or hadn't spoken. Your forehead might be furrowed with the effort of trying to figure everything out. Your eyes might be tight with the strain of constant vigilance. Let your facial muscles release their grip on yesterday's expressions and tomorrow's concerns. As you work with each area of your body, you're learning what Master Jin demonstrated by the river, how to engage fully when engagement is needed, then release completely when the task is done. You're discovering that most of the weight you carry has nothing to do with current circumstances and everything to do with mental habits that have learned to hoard experience instead of letting it flow. This isn't about becoming passive or disconnected from life. Master Jin didn't ignore the woman's need for help. He responded fully and appropriately. But when the helping was complete, he didn't carry it forward as a story about himself, a burden of worry, or a weight of judgment. Your body has this same wisdom. It knows how to work hard when work is needed and rest deeply when rest is available. It knows how to feel emotions fully when they arise and let them move through when they're ready to go. It knows how to respond to real threats with appropriate action and relax into safety when the threat has passed. The tension you carry chronically in your shoulders, your jaw, your stomach, your back is often old tension left over from situations that are no longer active. Like Kenji carrying the river crossing long after it was finished, your body might be bracing for conversations that already happened, defending against criticism that was never actually directed at you, or preparing for problems that were resolved long ago. Buddhist body awareness practices teach you to distinguish between necessary tension and unnecessary carrying. When you're lifting something heavy, your muscles appropriately engage. When you're navigating a challenging situation, your nervous system appropriately activates. But when the lifting is done or the challenge has passed, the tension can be released. The key is developing what Master Jin demonstrated, the ability to respond fully in the moment, then let go completely when the moment has passed. This isn't spiritual bypassing or emotional numbness. It's the natural intelligence of a system that knows how to engage and disengage fluidly. As you continue to settle into rest, Notice how each area of physical release affects your mental state. When your jaw unclenches, internal dialogue often quiets. When your shoulders drop, worries feel less urgent. When your stomach softens, anxiety loses some of its grip. This isn't coincidental. Mind and body are one seamless system. Your breath is the bridge between these two aspects of your being. Each inhale brings fresh possibility into your system. Each exhale offers an opportunity to release what you no longer need to hold. You don't have to analyze what you're letting go of, or understand why you were carrying it. You can simply exhale and trust your body's wisdom about what serves you and what doesn't. The story of the two monks reminds us that most suffering is optional. The unavoidable difficulties of life, like a washed-out bridge or a person in genuine need, come and go like weather. But the suffering we create by carrying these experiences long after they're finished, analyzing them endlessly, using them to judge ourselves or others, this suffering is something we add through our own mental and physical habits. Tonight, as your body settles deeper into rest, you can practice Master Jin's teaching directly. You can engage fully with the process of falling asleep without carrying the day's experiences forward into tomorrow. You can feel whatever emotions or sensations arise without gripping them or pushing them away. You can let your thoughts come and go like clouds passing through sky without making them into permanent residents of your awareness. Your body knows how to do this naturally. It releases the day's tensions without your conscious direction. It processes experiences and lets them go without your management. It carries you towards sleep with ancient wisdom that doesn't require your understanding or control. Trust this wisdom. Let your body teach your mind how to hold lightly, how to engage appropriately, how to release completely. Like the woman crossing the river, let yourself be carried by intelligence greater than your individual effort. And like Master Jin setting her down safely on the other side, learn to complete each action fully and then walk on, unburdened and free. The journey deepens as your awareness settles into increasingly spacious calm. The physical tensions you've been carrying have begun their natural release, like ice slowly melting into flowing water. Your breathing has found its own perfect rhythm, neither forced nor forgotten, simply present and supportive. The stories you've heard haven't just entertained your mind, they've been working on deeper levels, reshaping your relationship to thought itself. Tonight you're discovering something that anxious minds often forget, that space itself is healing. Not emptiness as absence, but spaciousness as possibility. The mind, like an overstuffed room, sometimes needs clearing before clarity can emerge. This next teaching reveals how mental accumulation, even of good things, can become its own form of suffering. In the mountain province of ancient China, during the Song dynasty when poetry and philosophy flourished like cherry blossoms in spring, there lived a scholar named Wei whose hunger for knowledge had consumed his life. Wei was not an ordinary student, but a man possessed by an almost mystical drive to understand everything that could be understood, to collect every piece of wisdom that had ever been written, to master every field of inquiry that existed under heaven. His house had once been spacious, with rooms that opened onto serene courtyards where bamboo grew and small streams trickled over carefully arranged stones. But over the years, Wei had transformed every available space into a library. Books filled the rooms from floor to ceiling. Scrolls were stacked in towers that reached toward the wooden rafters. Manuscripts covered every table, every chair, every windowsill. The narrow pathways between these paper mountains were barely wide enough for one person to navigate sideways. The collection was staggering in its scope and variety. Wei owned treatises on Confucian ethics and Taoist philosophy, Buddhist sutras and commentaries on the I Ching. He had medical texts describing the flow of qi through meridians, astronomical charts mapping the movement of celestial bodies, mathematical works exploring the properties of numbers and geometric forms. Poetry collections sat beside historical chronicles. Military strategy manuals neighbored agricultural guides. Works on music theory shared space with studies of calligraphy. But Wei's accumulation wasn't random or superficial. He read voraciously, constantly, obsessively. By candlelight in the darkest hours before dawn, by the grey light of overcast afternoons, by the golden glow of sunset filtering through paper windows. His eyes were perpetually strained from reading small characters by insufficient light. His back ached from hunching over texts for hours at a time. His hands were permanently stained with ink from the constant note-taking, cross-referencing, and copying he believed essential to true learning. Students came from distant provinces to study with Wei, drawn by his reputation for encyclopedic knowledge. But instead of finding a peaceful sage radiating wisdom and contentment, they discovered a man who seemed increasingly fragmented and overwhelmed by his own learning. Wei would sit with visitors in his cluttered study, surrounded by precarious towers of books, constantly interrupting himself to verify quotes, check references, and cite multiple authorities for every point he attempted to make. But as Mencius wrote about the cultivation of righteousness, Wei would begin, then stop mid-sentence. No, wait, that might have been Zunzi. Or was it in the Analects? Let me find the exact passage. He would rise from his cushion and begin pulling books from various stacks, his movements growing increasingly frantic as he searched for the precise text he wanted to reference. While he searched, other ideas would occur to him. Of course, this relates to what the Tao Te Ching says about Wu Wei, but you have to understand that in context with the Zhuangzi's butterfly dream, and there's also a fascinating commentary by. More books would join the growing pile on his desk. Papers would scatter. Inkstones would rattle dangerously close to precious manuscripts. His students would sit patiently at first, expecting that this scholarly thoroughness would eventually lead to profound insights. Instead, they often found themselves more confused after sessions with Wei than they had been before. His vast knowledge had become a labyrinth in which he regularly lost himself. Every answer led to 5 more questions. Every certainty dissolved into complexity. Every simple truth was immediately qualified by exceptions and alternative interpretations. Wei's daily routine had become an exhausting cycle of consumption and confusion. He would wake before sunrise and immediately begin reading, believing that starting the day by filling his mind with new information would make him more productive. By noon, he would have consulted dozens of texts, taken pages of notes, and started multiple cross-reference projects that demanded even more reading. Meals were eaten absently, with one hand holding food and the other turning pages. He barely tasted what he ate, his attention completely absorbed in whichever text lay open before him. Walking through his garden, he would carry a book, reading even as he moved along the stone paths between his plants. The beauty of blooming flowers went unnoticed, the songs of birds unheard, the changing light of different seasons invisible to eyes focused on written characters. The tragedy was that Wei's accumulation of knowledge had begun to prevent actual understanding. He knew what hundreds of authors had written about meditation, but he never meditated. He could quote extensively about the nature of wisdom, but felt increasingly unwise. He had memorized treatises on finding peace, but lived in constant mental agitation. His mind had become like his house, so stuffed with acquisitions that there was no room to move freely, to breathe easily, to simply be present with immediate experience. Every conversation was cluttered with quotes and citations. Every observation was immediately connected to something he had read rather than felt directly. Every moment of potential stillness was filled with remembered texts and scholarly analysis. Sleep had become nearly impossible. When Wei lay down at night, his mind would continue its relentless cataloguing and cross-referencing. He would replay passages he had read that day, worry about inconsistencies he had discovered between different authors, plan reading schedules for the following weeks. The very knowledge that was supposed to bring him peace had become the source of ceaseless mental activity. Word of Wei's peculiar condition eventually reached a Zen master named Huangbo, who lived simply in a small temple in the nearby mountains. Master Huangbo was known throughout the region not for his extensive learning. He owned very few books, but for a quality of presence that seemed to contain infinite space. Students who spent time with him often described feeling that their minds became clearer and more spacious in his company, as if his very being created room for them to think and breathe more freely. One autumn morning, when the mountain air was crisp and the leaves were beginning their transformation from green to gold, Master Huangbo appeared at Wei's door. He carried nothing but a simple walking stick and a small cloth bag containing a wooden bowl and a few other basic necessities. Wei was honored but also immediately anxious about receiving such a distinguished visitor. "Master Huangbo," he exclaimed, bowing repeatedly. "I am deeply privileged by your presence. Please, come in, sit down. Let me find the appropriate texts for our discussion. I have the complete works of the great Zen patriarchs, commentaries on the Platform Sutra, scholarly analyses of koans and their historical development." Wei's voice grew increasingly frantic as he began pulling books from various stacks, creating small avalanches of paper that cascaded across the floor. Scrolls unrolled like unfurling banners. Loose pages scattered like autumn leaves. The careful organization Wei had tried to maintain dissolved into chaos as he desperately searched for materials worthy of his guests' attention. Master Huangbo stood quietly in the doorway, observing the scene with eyes that seemed to take in everything while judging nothing. He watched Wei's increasingly frantic movements, the growing disorder in the room, the obvious stress that the simple act of receiving a visitor was creating for the scholar. "Stop," Master Huangbo said gently. The single word fell into the chaos like a stone dropped into turbulent water, creating ripples of stillness that gradually spread outward. Wei froze in mid-motion, a heavy volume in each hand, his face flushed with effort and embarrassment. "What are you looking for?" Master Huangbo asked, his voice carrying a quality of spaciousness that seemed to make the cramped room feel larger. "The right texts for our conversation," Wei replied, still clutching the books. "Something worthy of your wisdom, appropriate to the depth of understanding you bring." "I see," Master Huangbo nodded thoughtfully. "And what conversation are we having?" Wei blinked, realizing with a shock that in his excitement about finding the perfect materials, he had forgotten to consider what they might actually discuss. "Well, we haven't started yet. I'm still preparing." Master Huangbo smiled with what seemed like genuine delight. "You have spent years preparing for conversations you never have time to hold because you're always preparing for them." The observation hit Wei like cold mountain air, filling lungs accustomed to stuffy rooms. He looked around his study, at the towers of books that blocked natural light, at the papers that covered every surface, at the narrow pathways that made movement difficult, at the accumulated wisdom that had somehow become an obstacle to actual understanding. "May I suggest," Master Huangbo continued, settling onto a cushion in the one small, clear space available, "that we have a different kind of conversation? One that requires no books, no references, no preparation, 0. 5. Wei set down the volumes he had been holding and sat opposite his guest, though even sitting required him to move several stacks of papers. "I'm not sure I know how to have that kind of conversation," he admitted. "My thoughts always want to reference something I've read, to quote authorities, to verify accuracy." "Yes," Master Huangbo agreed. "Your mind has become like a marketplace where hundreds of vendors are all shouting at once, each claiming to have exactly what you need. But with so many voices competing for your attention, can you hear your own thoughts? Can you notice what you actually think and feel beneath all the quotations and references?" This question opened something in Wei's awareness that had been closed for so long he had forgotten it existed. When was the last time he had simply observed his own direct experience without immediately relating it to something he had read? When had he last allowed a thought to arise and be considered on its own merit without instantly consulting his mental library of authorities? "Close your eyes," Master Huangbo suggested. "Don't think about what you know about closing eyes or meditation or spiritual practice. Just close them." Wei found this instruction surprisingly difficult. As soon as his eyes closed, his mind began cycling through meditation techniques he had studied. Visualizations from Tibetan texts, breathing methods from Taoist manuals, postures described in Buddhist sutras, instructions from Confucian texts on cultivating inner stillness. "You're reading books in your head," Master Huangbo observed with what sounded like affectionate amusement. "Even with your eyes closed, you're consulting your library. Can you simply sit without referencing anything you've learned about sitting?" This was harder than Wei had expected. Every moment of potential stillness was immediately filled with remembered teachings, comparative analysis, questions about proper technique. His mind had become so accustomed to consulting external authorities that it had lost touch with its own natural intelligence. "I don't know how," Wei said, opening his eyes in frustration. "My mind automatically goes to what I've read about these practices. I can't seem to just sit without thinking about sitting." "Excellent," Master Huangbo said, his eyes brightening. "That's the first honest thing you've said since I arrived. I don't know is the beginning of all real learning." Master Huangbo gestured around the cluttered room. "You have filled your mind the way you have filled this house. Every space is occupied, every moment is crowded with information. But tell me, does a cup hold water better when it's already full or when it's empty?" The metaphor was simple but profound. Wei realized that his mind had become like a cup that was always full, unable to receive anything new because there was no space for it. Every experience was immediately filtered through existing knowledge. Every insight was compared to established authorities. Every moment of potential direct understanding was cluttered with scholarly commentary. "What should I do with all these books?" Wei asked, looking around at the accumulated wisdom that had somehow become a prison of information. "That depends," Master Huangbo replied. "Are they serving you or are you serving them? Knowledge is like food, nourishing in appropriate amounts, but sickening when consumed compulsively. Your mind needs room to digest what you've learned, space to develop its own understanding. They sat together in the increasingly comfortable silence of the late afternoon. Without the pressure to reference authorities or demonstrate learning, Wei began to notice things he had missed for years. The quality of light filtering through his paper windows had a warmth and beauty he had forgotten. The sound of wind moving through the bamboo in his courtyard created a natural music more subtle than any human composition. The simple act of breathing, usually unconscious background to his constant reading, became a gentle rhythm that anchored his awareness in immediate experience. "How do you feel right now?" Master Huangbo asked after they had sat quietly for some time. "Peaceful," Wei said with surprise. "More peaceful than I've felt in years. But also empty, like something is missing." "Yes," Master Huangbo nodded. "You've become addicted to mental fullness, to having your awareness constantly occupied with information. Emptiness feels uncomfortable because you've forgotten that space is not lack, it's possibility. A room with no furniture feels empty until you realize it gives you freedom to dance." Over the following days, Master Huangbo helped Wei begin the delicate process of creating space in both his house and his mind. They didn't throw away his books indiscriminately, but they did identify which texts still sparked genuine interest and understanding versus which had become habitual accumulations that no longer served his actual learning. Wei kept perhaps 1/10 of his collection, carefully chosen for their continued relevance to his authentic interests and their ability to inspire rather than overwhelm. The rest were donated to students who could benefit from them, to monasteries that needed texts for their libraries, to schools where they would be actively studied rather than passively hoarded. More importantly, Wei began creating empty spaces in his daily routine. Periods of time when he deliberately didn't read, didn't take notes, didn't consult authorities. Times when he would sit in his garden and simply observe the changing light, the movement of clouds, the subtle shifts of seasons that he had been too mentally busy to notice for years. At first, these empty periods felt uncomfortable, almost anxiety-provoking. Wei's mind would reach automatically for something to fill the silence, a text to consult, a cross-reference to pursue, a scholarly question to investigate. But gradually, he began to appreciate the spaciousness itself. In the gaps between information consumption, his own insights began to arise. Direct observations that didn't need verification from external sources. Understanding that emerged from his own experience rather than from accumulated reading. Wei's teaching transformed completely. Instead of overwhelming students with encyclopedic references and multiple authorities, he began offering them something more valuable, space to develop their own understanding. He would pose questions and then wait patiently while students found their own responses. He learned to listen more deeply, to trust that wisdom could arise from silence as well as from study. The most surprising discovery was that Wei's actual knowledge became more accessible and useful when it wasn't competing with thousands of other pieces of information for his attention. The texts he had chosen to keep became living resources rather than dead accumulations. He could draw from them fluidly because they weren't buried under layers of scholarly debris. His sleep improved dramatically as his mind learned to rest in spaciousness rather than churning through endless information. The mental noise that had kept him awake for years, the constant cross-referencing, the obsessive cataloging, the compulsive analyzing, gradually quieted as he stopped feeding it with constant input. Wei discovered what Buddhist masters have always known, that wisdom is not the accumulation of information, but the spaciousness that allows understanding to emerge. Like clear water, the mind becomes most useful when it's not clouded with excessive content. Like a musical instrument, awareness creates its most beautiful sounds when there's space between the notes. This story illuminates something crucial about the modern relationship to information and the anxious mind's tendency to seek security through knowledge. Like Wei, many people fill their mental space with endless input, articles to read, videos to watch, podcasts to consume, courses to take, advice to collect. The underlying assumption is that enough information will eventually provide certainty, control, and peace. But often the opposite occurs. Information overload creates decision paralysis. Too many options generate anxiety rather than clarity. Constant input prevents the digestion necessary for wisdom to develop from knowledge. The mind becomes like Wei's house, so stuffed with acquisitions that there's no room for actual living. The anxious mind is particularly susceptible to this trap because seeking more information feels productive. Researching problems, gathering advice, studying solutions, these activities create the illusion of progress toward resolution. But often they're just sophisticated forms of mental busywork that postpone the uncomfortable but necessary work of sitting with uncertainty, feeling difficult emotions, or making imperfect decisions with incomplete information. Buddhist wisdom suggests that sometimes the most radical act is not adding more content to consciousness, but creating space within it. Not learning more techniques, but practicing simplicity. Not collecting more teachings, but digesting what you already know through direct experience. Right now, as you rest, you can practice Wei's hard-won understanding. Notice the quality of space in your awareness. You've been receiving stories and teachings tonight, but you don't need to memorize them, analyze them, or figure out how to implement them. You can simply let them settle into your consciousness like seeds planted in good soil, trusting that understanding will emerge in its own time without your mental management. Your mind is probably more cluttered than you realize, filled with information you've consumed but never fully processed, advice you've gathered but never implemented, knowledge that has become mental noise rather than living wisdom. This clutter isn't just neutral content, it actively prevents the clarity and spaciousness that allow genuine insight to arise. But you don't have to clean out your mental house all at once. Tonight, you can simply stop adding more content. Stop analyzing these stories as you hear them. Stop trying to remember every detail or understand every implication. Let your awareness become spacious enough to receive without grasping, to appreciate without accumulating. Feel the relief that comes when you stop trying to make everything fit into existing mental categories. When you stop cross-referencing every new idea with things you already know, when you let experience be fresh and immediate rather than immediately filing it away in your mental library. Buddhist meditation is fundamentally about this kind of spaciousness. Not the emptiness of having nothing, but the openness of having room. Room to breathe, room to feel, room for unexpected insights to arise, room for wisdom that doesn't come from books or teachers, but from the natural clarity of awareness when it's not cramped by excessive content. This spaciousness isn't passive or vacant. It's vibrantly alive, receptive, intelligent. Like the space in a musical hall that allows sound to resonate, or the space in a garden that allows flowers to grow, mental space is what permits understanding to develop and wisdom to flourish. As your body continues its natural descent towards sleep, let your mind practice Wei's liberation. Don't try to process or integrate everything you've heard tonight. Don't plan how you'll remember these teachings or apply them tomorrow. Simply rest in the spaciousness that's available right now, the gap between thoughts, the pause between breaths, the openness that exists whenever you stop filling every moment with mental activity. Your consciousness knows how to use space wisely, just as your body knows how to use rest for healing and renewal. Trust this natural intelligence. Let your awareness become as spacious as the night sky, holding whatever arises without being crowded or overwhelmed by it. In the morning, you may find that insights have emerged not from effort, but from emptiness, not from adding more content, but from creating room for understanding to develop naturally. This is Wei's gift to you, the recognition that sometimes the most profound learning comes not from accumulating more, but from clearing space for wisdom to breathe. Rest now in this spaciousness, letting it support you as you move deeper into the night's teaching. The next layer of understanding awaits, emerging not from complexity, but from the elegant simplicity that only becomes visible when the mind finally has room to see clearly. Your journey through these ancient teachings has been reshaping something fundamental about how you relate to your own experience. The breath has shown you an anchor in the present moment. The body has taught you about releasing what doesn't need to be carried. The mind has revealed how spaciousness itself can be healing. Now you're ready for perhaps the most challenging and liberating wisdom of all, how to make peace with uncertainty itself. The anxious mind craves predictability, clear outcomes, guaranteed results. It exhausts itself trying to peer into an unknowable future, analyzing every possibility, preparing for every potential scenario. But what if this very craving for certainty is what creates so much suffering? What if peace comes not from knowing how everything will turn out, but from learning to rest comfortably in the vast maybe that surrounds all human experience? In a fertile valley nestled between rolling hills where morning mist clung to ancient oak trees and streams ran clear over smooth stones, there lived a farmer named Liu whose fields produced rice, soybeans, and vegetables that fed not only his own family, but many families in the surrounding villages. Liu's farm had been in his family for 7 generations, passed down from father to son, along with the accumulated wisdom of weather patterns, soil conditions, and the subtle arts of working in harmony with natural cycles. But Liu was known throughout the region not for his agricultural success, which was considerable, or for the size of his harvests, which were consistently abundant, but for something much more unusual: his remarkable equanimity in the face of what others called good fortune and bad fortune. While his neighbors celebrated wildly when things went well and despaired dramatically when difficulties arose, Liu maintained a steady presence that seemed unshakable regardless of circumstances. This unusual quality first became apparent to his neighbors during Liu's 35th year, when an event occurred that everyone in the valley immediately recognized as either a great blessing or a terrible curse, depending on their perspective. Liu owned a single horse, a strong chestnut mare named Jade, who had been his companion and primary work partner for over a decade. In a community where most farmers worked entirely by hand, using simple tools passed down through generations, Liu's horse represented significant prosperity. Jade could plow in a morning what would take Liu several days to accomplish alone. She could carry to market loads that would require multiple human trips. During harvest season, her strength multiplied Liu's productivity many times over. In the economic reality of their agricultural community, the horse was not just a valuable asset, but the foundation of Liu's relative prosperity. One crisp morning in early spring, when the first green shoots were just beginning to emerge from the rich, dark soil and the air carried the promising scent of growing things, Liu woke to find his paddock gate standing open. Jade was nowhere to be seen. The wooden fence posts showed signs of recent damage, as if something had spooked the horse during the night, causing her to break through and flee into the surrounding countryside. Liu examined the broken gate with the same methodical attention he gave to all farm problems, noting the direction the horse had traveled and the nature of the damage. But his reaction was notably different from what his neighbors expected. There was no cursing, no apparent distress, no frantic organization of search parties. Liu simply repaired the gate and went about his morning chores. Word of the missing horse spread quickly through the valley's network of interconnected farms. Neighbors began arriving before noon, gathering in Liu's courtyard to offer sympathy and assistance. They brought offers to help search the surrounding hills, suggestions about where Jade might have gone, and most of all, condolences for what they universally recognized as a significant misfortune. "Liu," said his nearest neighbor, an elderly man whose own small plot required entirely manual cultivation, "this is terrible luck. Just before planting season too. How will you prepare your fields without the horse? How will you transport your harvest to market? This could ruin your whole year's income." Other neighbors nodded in agreement, their faces showing genuine concern mixed with the subtle satisfaction that sometimes accompanies others' misfortunes. "Such bad luck," they murmured. "What awful timing. This must be devastating for you." Liu, who had been hoeing weeds in his vegetable garden while his neighbors discussed his predicament, straightened slowly and leaned on his hoe handle. His weathered face, deeply lined from decades of outdoor work, showed no sign of the distress his visitors expected to see. "Maybe," he said simply, his voice carrying neither agreement nor disagreement with their assessment. The neighbors were puzzled by this response. They had come prepared to offer comfort for obvious misfortune, but Liu didn't seem to need comforting. His single-word response hung in the morning air like mist that refuses to burn off despite the sun's warming rays. "Maybe?" One neighbor repeated, clearly confused. "Liu, your horse is gone. Your most valuable possession, your primary source of agricultural power, your main economic advantage, it's disappeared. How can you say maybe about whether this is bad luck?" Liu returned to his hoeing, each movement deliberate and unhurried. The rhythmic scraping of his hoe against soil and weeds provided a steady counterpoint to his neighbor's agitation. "Maybe," he repeated, offering no further explanation. The neighbors exchanged concerned glances. Perhaps the shock of losing Jade had affected Liu's mental faculties. Perhaps he was in denial about the severity of his situation. They continued to offer practical assistance, help organizing search parties, loans of manual labor to compensate for the missing horse, advice about where to look for lost animals. But Liu simply continued his garden work, acknowledging their offers politely, but declining them with gentle firmness. "The horse will return if returning serves some purpose," he said. "If not, something else will unfold." Frustrated by his apparent lack of appropriate concern, the neighbors eventually departed, muttering among themselves about Liu's strange attitude toward what was clearly a serious setback. Some suspected he was hiding his true feelings out of pride. Others worried that years of solitary farming had made him eccentric. Most concluded that he simply hadn't yet grasped the full implications of his loss. 3 days passed. Liu continued his spring planting preparations, working longer hours to compensate for Jade's absence, but showing no signs of the despair his neighbors had predicted. On the 4th morning, as Liu was eating his simple breakfast of rice porridge and pickled vegetables in the courtyard outside his modest farmhouse, he heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching from the mountain trail that led to higher pastures. Jade came into view first, moving at an easy trot, her chestnut coat gleaming with health and her eyes bright with what looked like contentment. But she was not alone. Following behind her were 4 wild horses, magnificent animals with flowing manes and powerful bodies that spoke of lives lived in freedom among the mountain meadows. Their coats ranged from deep black to silvery grey to rich brown, and they moved with the fluid grace of creatures who had never known harness or bit. The wild horses followed Jade into Liu's paddock as if they belonged there, apparently having accepted her as some sort of leader during their mountain adventure. Liu watched this procession with the same steady attention he gave to weather patterns or crop growth, interested, observant, but not emotionally reactive to what was clearly an extraordinary development. Word spread even faster than it had when Jade disappeared. By mid-morning, the same neighbors who had come to offer condolences were returning to offer congratulations. They gathered in Liu's courtyard, marveling at the 5 horses now grazing peacefully in his expanded paddock. "Liu!" they exclaimed with voices full of amazement and perhaps a touch of envy. "What incredible good fortune! You've lost 1 horse and gained 4 more. You're now the richest farmer in the valley. You'll be able to plow 5 times as much land, carry 5 times as much to market. This is the best luck anyone has ever had around here." Their excitement was palpable and infectious. The missing horse had been transformed from disaster to miracle. They calculated the economic implications with obvious enthusiasm, how much additional land Liu could cultivate, how much more grain he could transport, how his prosperity would multiply exponentially with this unexpected windfall of animal power. Liu was sitting in the shade of an ancient persimmon tree, repairing a wooden bucket with the same focused attention he gave to all maintenance tasks. The bucket was old, but serviceable, its staves held together by iron bands that had been shaped by his grandfather's hands decades earlier. His movements were precise and economical as he tightened joints and sealed gaps. Without looking up from his work, Liu responded to his neighbor's celebration with the same simple word he had offered to their earlier condolences. "Maybe." "Maybe?" The neighbors' voices rose in disbelief. "How can you say maybe about this? You clearly have the best luck in the province. 5 horses! Most farmers work their entire lives without owning a single horse, and now you have 5 magnificent animals. This is obviously wonderful fortune." Liu tested the bucket's stability, filled it with water from his well to check for leaks, then set it aside to dry in the afternoon sun. "Maybe," he repeated, his tone neither dismissive nor argumentative, simply non-committal. The neighbors went away shaking their heads, unable to understand Liu's refusal to celebrate what was clearly an extraordinary piece of good fortune. Some wondered if he was being humble to avoid attracting jealous attention from spirits or neighbors. Others thought he might be worried about the practical challenges of managing 5 horses instead of 1. Most concluded that Liu was simply an eccentric man who refused to acknowledge obvious reality. Liu's life did change significantly with the addition of 4 horses to his agricultural operation. The extra animals required more feed, more space, more daily care. His morning and evening routines expanded to include tending to the needs of 5 horses instead of 1. But they also enabled him to cultivate significantly more land, to transport much larger loads, to complete seasonal work in a fraction of the time previously required. The change that attracted the most attention from his neighbors, however, involved Liu's eldest son, Wei, a strong and capable young man of 22 who had been working alongside his father since childhood and was gradually taking over more of the farm's daily operations. Wei was known throughout the valley for his skill with animals, his understanding of farming techniques, and his ambitious plans for expanding the family's agricultural enterprise. Wei was particularly excited about the 4 new horses. He saw them not just as additional work animals, but as an opportunity to transform their farm into the most productive operation in the region. He began developing plans for breaking the wild horses to harness, training them for various agricultural tasks, and integrating them into expanded cultivation schedules that would dramatically increase their annual harvest. The training process was challenging. The wild horses had never been handled by humans and initially resisted all attempts at domestication. They were powerful, spirited animals accustomed to complete freedom, and they did not adapt easily to the constraints and disciplines of agricultural work. Wei approached the training with determination and skill, using techniques passed down through generations of his family. He worked patiently with each horse, gradually building trust, establishing communication, teaching them to accept human direction. The process required enormous physical effort, precise timing, and the kind of calm confidence that comes from deep familiarity with animal behavior. It was during the training of the most spirited of the wild horses, a powerful black stallion with intelligent eyes and a magnificent bearing, that the accident occurred. Wei had been working with the horse for several weeks, making steady progress in establishing basic communication and trust. On this particular morning, everything seemed to be proceeding normally. The horse appeared calm and receptive to Wei's guidance. But something, perhaps a sudden noise, perhaps a shift in the wind carrying an unfamiliar scent, perhaps just the unpredictable nature of wild spirits, startled the stallion. In an instant, the animal reared high on his hind legs, his front hooves flashing dangerously close to Wei's head. Wei tried to step back quickly to avoid the hooves, but his foot caught on a piece of training equipment that had been left on the ground. He fell heavily, his left leg twisting beneath him with a sharp crack that could be heard clearly across the training paddock. The stallion, equally startled by Wei's sudden movement and cry of pain, wheeled and galloped to the far side of the enclosure, leaving Wei lying motionless on the packed earth. Liu, who had been working in a nearby field, heard his son's cry and arrived within minutes to find Wei conscious, but in obvious distress. The young man's leg was clearly broken, bent at an unnatural angle that spoke of serious injury. Liu gently examined the break, his weathered hands moving with the same careful attention he gave to injured animals or damaged equipment. "Can you move your toes?" he asked quietly. Wei grimaced, but managed to demonstrate that the break, while serious, had not severed the nerves that controlled movement. Liu nodded and began the process of fashioning a temporary splint from materials at hand, straight branches from a nearby willow tree, strips of cloth torn from his own shirt, leather cords from the training equipment. The process of transporting Wei to the village healer was slow and careful, requiring Liu to convert one of his ox carts into a makeshift stretcher. By the time they returned home after having the leg properly set and bound, word of the accident had spread throughout the valley's network of farms and villages. Once again, neighbors gathered in Liu's courtyard, but this time their mood was somber rather than celebratory. They came with food for the family, offers to help with farm work that Wei would no longer be able to perform, and most predictably, commentary about the unfortunate turn of events. "Liu," said the same elderly neighbor, who had offered condolences about the missing horse and congratulations about the returned horses with companions. "This is terrible news. Wei is your best worker, your strongest helper, the one you've been training to eventually take over the farm. Now he's crippled, may never walk properly again, and certainly won't be able to handle heavy agricultural work. Those wild horses have brought you nothing but trouble after all." Other neighbors nodded in agreement, their faces reflecting the mixture of genuine sympathy and somewhat satisfied recognition of misfortune that had characterized their earlier visit. "Such bad luck," they murmured. "What awful timing, just when you needed extra help to manage 5 horses. Now you're worse off than when you had just one." Liu was sitting beside Wei's bedside, brewing medicinal tea from herbs the village healer had prescribed to reduce pain and promote healing. The afternoon light filtering through the paper windows of their simple farmhouse created patterns of brightness and shadow that shifted slowly as the sun moved across the sky. Without looking up from his careful preparation of the tea, Liu offered his now familiar response. "Maybe." "Maybe?" The neighbors' voices carried a note of exasperation that had become familiar over the months of Liu's consistently non-committal reactions to obvious fortune and misfortune. "Your son is badly injured, possibly permanently disabled. Your most important helper is out of action indefinitely. How can this not be clearly bad luck?" Liu finished brewing the tea, tested its temperature carefully, then helped Wei sit up enough to drink the healing liquid. His movements were gentle and efficient, focused entirely on the immediate task of caring for his injured son rather than on abstract evaluations of whether the situation represented good or bad fortune. "Wei is alive," he said simply. "His leg will heal. What that healing brings, we will discover when it comes." The neighbors left with the same mixture of frustration and puzzlement they had experienced during previous visits. Liu's refusal to categorize events as clearly positive or negative seemed almost perverse to people who lived in a world where broken legs were obviously bad luck and found horses were obviously good fortune. Over the following weeks, as Wei's leg healed slowly and the demands of managing 5 horses fell entirely on Liu's aging shoulders, the wisdom of the old farmer's perspective remained invisible to most of his neighbors. The additional workload was clearly challenging. Liu had to rise earlier and work later to accomplish tasks that had been shared between father and son. The complexity of managing multiple horses required constant attention and physical effort that would have been difficult even for a younger man. But Liu approached these challenges with the same steady presence he brought to all farm work. He modified his routines to accommodate his son's temporary disability. He simplified some operations and postponed others. He focused on essential tasks and let less critical activities wait for better times. His approach was pragmatic rather than dramatic, adaptive rather than resistant. 2 months after Wei's accident, when the young man was just beginning to walk again with the aid of wooden crutches but still could not perform heavy labor, a development occurred that completely transformed their neighbors' understanding of the entire sequence of events. War broke out between two rival provinces whose conflict had been building for years over disputed territory and trading rights. The fighting quickly escalated from border skirmishes to full-scale military campaigns that drew in surrounding regions. Military conscription officers began traveling from village to village, collecting able-bodied young men to serve as soldiers in armies that everyone knew would suffer terrible casualties. The conscription was not voluntary. Every healthy male between the ages of 16 and 30 was required to report for military service. Families pleaded, offered bribes, sought exemptions, but the military officials were under strict orders to meet recruitment quotas regardless of individual circumstances. When the conscription officers arrived in Liu's valley, they went systematically from farm to farm, examining young men and determining their fitness for military service. They took the strong sons of Liu's neighbors, healthy young farmers who could march long distances, carry heavy equipment, and fight effectively in the brutal hand-to-hand combat that characterized warfare of their era. When they arrived at Liu's farm, they found Wei sitting in the courtyard, still weak from his recent injury, his leg visibly damaged and his ability to walk clearly compromised. The officers examined him briefly, determined that he would be a liability rather than an asset in military operations, and marked him as unfit for service. That evening, as the sound of weeping could be heard from households throughout the valley where young men had been taken from their families, possibly forever, the same neighbors who had repeatedly judged Liu's fortune came to his farm once more. But this time their mood was different. "Liu," the elderly neighbor said, his voice filled with a new kind of recognition, "Wei's injury has saved his life. If he hadn't been hurt by that wild horse, he would have been taken for the war like all the other young men. The horses that seemed like such good luck brought the accident that seemed like such bad luck, which now appears to have been the greatest good luck of all." Liu was in his vegetable garden, harvesting radishes by the light of a full moon that made the work possible even after sunset. His movements were unhurried and methodical, each radish cleaned of soil and placed carefully in a woven basket that would be carried to the root cellar for winter storage. He straightened slowly, looked at his neighbors gathered in the moonlight, then returned to his harvesting. "Maybe," he said. This time, the neighbors didn't argue. They stood quietly in the peaceful evening air, finally beginning to understand something about the nature of fortune and misfortune that Liu had been demonstrating all along. Events that appeared clearly positive or negative from one perspective might look entirely different from another. Circumstances that seemed definitely advantageous or disadvantageous in the short term might prove to be exactly the opposite over longer periods of time. Liu's story teaches us something profound about the anxious mind's relationship to uncertainty and the future. Most anxiety comes from trying to determine in advance whether current circumstances will lead to positive or negative outcomes. We worry about changes at work, wondering if they'll help or hurt our careers. We analyze relationship developments, trying to predict whether they'll bring happiness or heartbreak. We lose sleep over financial decisions, health concerns, family situations, all because we're trying to know the unknowable. But Liu demonstrates a different way of relating to life's inherent uncertainty. His persistent maybe wasn't indifference or denial. It was recognition that the story is always still unfolding, that current events rarely have the meaning they initially appear to have, that what looks like disaster might be redirection, and what seems like fortune might be complication. This doesn't mean becoming passive or failing to make practical decisions. Liu continued farming, caring for his animals, tending his son's injury, adapting to changing circumstances. But he held all these activities lightly, without the mental weight that comes from needing to know exactly how everything will turn out. The anxious mind wants certainty about the future because certainty feels like safety. If I can predict what will happen, the reasoning goes, I can prepare for it properly and avoid being hurt or surprised. But this approach creates its own form of suffering, because life simply doesn't offer the kind of predictability that anxiety demands. Right now, as you rest, you might be carrying worries about situations in your own life that seem clearly problematic or promising. Work situations that feel definitely positive or negative. Relationship developments that appear obviously helpful or harmful. Health concerns that seem certainly worrisome. Financial circumstances that look unambiguously good or bad. But what if these situations are more like Liu's story than they appear? What if the job change that worries you is redirecting you toward better opportunities? What if the relationship that seems to be struggling is clearing away what doesn't serve so that something healthier can emerge? What if the financial pressure that keeps you awake is teaching you values and skills that will serve you for decades? This isn't about positive thinking or pretending problems don't exist. Liu didn't pretend his son's injury wasn't painful or challenging. He acknowledged the reality of broken bones while holding lightly to assumptions about what that meant for their future. The practice here is learning to hold your evaluations of current circumstances as provisional rather than final. Yes, this situation is challenging. Maybe it's leading somewhere better. Yes, that opportunity looks promising. Maybe it will bring complications you haven't anticipated. The maybe isn't ignorance. It's wisdom about the limits of prediction and the fluidity of life. Your breath teaches this same wisdom. You don't know what the next inhale will bring, what you'll smell, how it will feel, what thoughts might arise. But you breathe anyway, trusting the process without needing guarantees about specific outcomes. Each breath is complete in itself, while contributing to a larger pattern you don't need to understand or control. Buddhist wisdom teaches that suffering comes not from uncertainty itself, but from our resistance to uncertainty. When we demand that life be predictable, we're fighting against life's fundamental nature. But when we learn to rest comfortably in not knowing, we stop exhausting ourselves with futile attempts to control the uncontrollable. This doesn't mean you stop planning or making practical decisions. It means you hold your plans lightly, ready to adapt when circumstances change. It means you make the best choices you can with available information while remaining open to possibilities you haven't considered. As you settle deeper into rest, practice Liu's wisdom. Notice areas where you've been rushing to judge circumstances as definitely good or definitely bad. Can you soften those evaluations? Can you hold your current situation with the spacious maybe that allows for possibilities you haven't imagined? 0. 7. Feel the relief that comes with releasing the exhausting job of predicting and controlling the future. Your life can unfold with its own intelligence while you rest in the vast uncertainty that contains all possibilities. The horses may run away or return with companions. The injuries may heal into strength or reveal hidden protections. The story continues to write itself while you learn to trust the process rather than needing to know the ending. Tonight, let Liu's teaching settle into your bones. Let your breath carry you into the peaceful not knowing that allows for genuine surprise, unexpected gifts, and possibilities that exceed your current imagination. The future doesn't need your supervision. Your circumstances don't need your constant evaluation. Life knows how to unfold while you rest in the wisdom of maybe. In a quiet village at the edge of ancient China, where morning mist rose from rice fields like incense from temple altars, there lived a master potter named May, whose hands could transform ordinary clay into vessels of extraordinary beauty. Her workshop sat beside a stream that provided the perfect clay, earth that had been tumbled smooth by countless seasons of flow, mixed with minerals that gave her pieces their distinctive warmth and strength. May had studied pottery since childhood, first watching her grandmother's weathered hands guide clay on the wheel, then slowly learning to feel the subtle conversations between earth, water, and fire that determined whether a piece would emerge as art or simply collapse into formless mud. By the time she reached middle age, May's work was sought after by collectors from distant provinces who would wait months for one of her tea bowls or storage jars. But May's reputation was built on more than just technical skill. She was known for something unusual in the competitive world of artisans, her absolute refusal to hurry. While other potters pushed clay to dry faster, fired kilns at higher temperatures to speed the process, or worked long hours to increase their output, May followed rhythms that seemed to move at the pace of seasons rather than days. She would spend entire mornings just preparing clay, kneading it slowly until it reached exactly the right consistency, letting it rest between sessions like bread dough that needs time to develop its character. She mixed her glazes in small batches, testing each combination repeatedly until the colors reached the precise depth and luminosity she envisioned. Most remarkably, she would sometimes abandon pieces part-way through completion if they weren't developing according to their own natural inclination. This approach drove her apprentices to distraction. Young potters would come to study with May, expecting to learn efficient techniques for producing beautiful work quickly. Instead, they found themselves spending weeks learning to recognize when clay was truly ready to be worked, when a piece wanted to be taller or wider than originally planned, when the firing temperature was perfect for that particular day's humidity and wind conditions. One apprentice, a talented young woman named Lin, who had come from the bustling pottery centers of the South, found May's methods almost impossible to accept. Lin was accustomed to workshops where dozens of pieces were thrown each day, where kilns fired on predictable schedules, where productivity was measured in completed works rather than mysterious processes. "Master May," Lin said one afternoon as they sat beside the stream where May was aging clay that wouldn't be ready to use for another month, "I don't understand your methods. Back home, a potter of your skill could produce 5 times as many pieces. You could serve more customers, make more money, train more students. Why do you work so slowly?" May was watching the water flow over stones that had been polished smooth by years of patient current. Her hands, permanently stained with clay and glazes, rested quietly in her lap. "Show me the hurrying stream," she said. Lin looked at the water moving steadily past them, carrying leaves and occasional small fish in its gentle current. "I don't understand. The stream isn't hurrying. It's just flowing." "Exactly," May nodded. "The stream reaches the sea not by pushing against its banks or trying to skip over obstacles, but by following its natural course. It moves fast where the channel is narrow and steep, slow where the bed is wide and shallow. It doesn't compare itself to other streams or worry about arriving late." Lin frowned, still not grasping the connection to pottery. "But we're not streams, Master. We have deadlines, customers waiting, bills to pay. We can't just flow at whatever pace feels natural. May smiled and reached for a lump of clay that had been sitting beside her, aging in the damp air. She began working it with her hands, not trying to shape anything specific, just feeling its texture and responsiveness. "This clay has been waiting by the stream for 3 months," she said. "I could have used it the day I dug it, mixed it with water and forced it onto the wheel. What do you think would have happened?" "It would have been harder to work with," Lynn admitted. "More likely to crack or collapse." "Yes. But why?" Lynn thought carefully. She had enough experience to know that fresh clay, while malleable, lacked the subtle integration that came with time. Because the water needs time to penetrate completely. The different minerals need time to blend. The clay particles need time to align properly. "The clay has its own schedule," May said, continuing to work the earth between her fingers. "I can force it to cooperate before it's ready, but then I'm fighting against its nature instead of working with it. The piece might hold together long enough to fire, but it won't have the strength or beauty that comes when clay and potter work as partners." Over the following weeks, May began teaching Lynn to recognize the subtle signs that indicated when different aspects of the pottery process were ready to proceed. How clay felt different in the hands when it had aged properly. How glazes looked when their chemical interactions had fully developed. How the sound of a pot being tapped revealed whether it was ready for the next stage of firing. But the most challenging lesson involved learning to wait when nothing seemed to be happening at all. One morning, Lynn arrived at the workshop to find May sitting quietly beside the kiln, which had been loaded with finished pieces the night before but hadn't yet been lit. "Master," Lynn said with barely concealed impatience, "the kiln is ready. The weather is perfect for firing. Why aren't we starting?" May was holding a cup of tea, breathing in the steam that rose from the liquid. "What do you notice about this morning?" she asked. Lynn looked around, frustrated by what seemed like another delay tactic. "It's a beautiful day. Clear skies, no wind to interfere with the kiln temperature. Ideal conditions for firing." "Yes," May agreed. "And yesterday?" "Yesterday was. Well, yesterday was also nice. And the day before that." Lynn's voice carried an edge of accusation. "Master, we've had perfect firing weather for a week, but you keep finding reasons to wait." May set down her tea and walked to the kiln, placing her hand on its clay walls. "Feel this," she said. Lynn touched the kiln and immediately understood. Despite the beautiful weather, the clay walls held a subtle dampness from the previous week's humidity. "It's still wet inside," she said with surprise. "The kiln has its own readiness," May explained. "I could force it to fire now, build a hotter fire to burn off the moisture quickly. But then the heating would be uneven. The pieces inside might crack from thermal shock. Better to wait until the kiln itself is ready to partner with us." This became Lynn's most difficult lesson, learning to work with timing that couldn't be controlled or predicted. Some days everything aligned perfectly and they would complete multiple stages of work in a single session. Other days, the clay, the weather, the glazes, or the kiln itself would signal that waiting was the wisest choice. Lynn's habitual anxiety about productivity gradually transformed into something she had never experienced before, trust in a process that was larger than her individual will. She began to notice that the pieces she created when everything felt ready were not just technically superior, but possessed a quality of ease and beauty that couldn't be forced through effort alone. One afternoon, after several months of this training, Lynn was working on a tea bowl that had been challenging her for weeks. The shape was correct, the walls properly thinned, but something about it felt unfinished in a way she couldn't identify. She had been trying different approaches to complete it, but nothing felt right. "I don't know what this piece wants," she told May in frustration. "I can see that it's not finished, but I can't figure out what it needs." May examined the bowl carefully, turning it in the light, feeling its weight and balance. "It's waiting," she said simply. "Waiting for what?" "I don't know. But neither do you, and that's the point. Sometimes we have to let things be unfinished until we understand what finish they're asking for." Lynn set the bowl aside reluctantly, her mind churning with impatience and uncertainty. But over the following days, she found herself glancing at it regularly, not trying to work on it, but simply maintaining a kind of open attention to its presence. 3 weeks later, while mixing a new batch of glaze, Lynn suddenly knew what the bowl wanted. Not through analysis or planning, but through a direct recognition that felt like remembering something she had temporarily forgotten. The piece needed a particular cream glaze with iron specks that would complement its warm clay body perfectly. When the bowl emerged from its final firing, both student and teacher knew immediately that something special had occurred. The piece had a completeness and rightness that went beyond technical skill. It had found its own perfect expression through a collaboration between human intention and natural timing. This experience taught Lynn something about anxiety and patience that changed not just her pottery, but her entire approach to living. She realized that much of her mental suffering came from trying to force outcomes according to her timeline rather than working with the natural rhythm of development and change. May's teaching reveals something profound about the restless mind's relationship to time. Anxiety often comes from the belief that things should happen faster than they're happening, that we should understand more quickly than understanding naturally develops, that problems should resolve according to our schedule rather than their own complex timing. But life, like pottery, has its own organic rhythm that can't be hurried without damaging the final result. Insights need time to ripen. Healing requires its own seasons. Changes unfold according to principles that are larger than our individual impatience. The anxious mind wants to skip the waiting, to rush past uncertainty into premature closure. It demands that meditation work immediately, that therapy provide instant relief, that spiritual practices deliver quick enlightenment. But wisdom, like properly aged clay, develops its strength and beauty through patient time. Right now, as you rest in this deepening night, you can practice May's teaching. Notice areas in your life where you might be trying to force timing, relationships that you want to develop faster than they're naturally progressing, personal changes that you're pushing to happen on your schedule, problems that you're demanding resolve before they've had time to ripen into workable form. Feel the relief that comes with releasing the need to control timing. Your healing doesn't have to happen on your timeline. Your understanding doesn't need to arrive when you think you're ready for it. Your peace can emerge according to its own natural seasons. Your breath demonstrates this wisdom perfectly. It doesn't hurry toward the exhale or linger too long in the inhale. It follows its own organic rhythm, responding to your body's needs without your conscious management. Each breath is complete in its own timing, neither rushed nor delayed. Buddhist wisdom teaches that everything arises when conditions are right, not when we decide they should be right. Like maize clay aging by the stream, your consciousness is always preparing for deeper understanding, even when nothing seems to be happening on the surface. Some of the anxious thoughts you've been trying to resolve might simply need more time to ripen before they're ready for release. Some of the changes you've been pushing might need to develop according to their own internal schedule. Some of the peace you've been seeking might already be developing in hidden ways that will only become visible when the timing is complete. Tonight, let May's patience guide you into rest. Don't try to sleep faster than sleep wants to come. Don't push your mind toward peace more quickly than peace wants to arrive. Let your consciousness settle according to its own natural rhythm, trusting that rest knows its perfect timing better than your intention does. The kiln of your awareness has been warming throughout this night's journey. The clay of your understanding has been aging in the stream of these stories. Everything is preparing for the perfect moment of completion, but that moment can't be forced or predicted. It can only be received when it naturally arrives. Feel how your body already knows this rhythm of ripening. Your muscles don't release all their tension at once, but gradually, layer by layer, according to what's ready to let go. Your breathing doesn't immediately find its deepest rhythm, but slowly settles into increasingly restful patterns. Rest in this natural timing. Trust that your deepest healing is happening even when you can't perceive it. Like clay aging by the stream, you are always becoming more workable, more beautiful, more ready for the next stage of your unfolding. The master potter of your own awareness knows exactly what you need and when you need it. Tonight, let that wisdom work without your interference, shaping you according to perfect timing that serves your highest good. The night deepens around you like water around a stone, and your understanding continues to unfold in layers. May's teaching about patience and natural timing has shown you that wisdom cannot be hurried, that some things must ripen according to their own seasons. But there's one more bridge to cross before reaching the deepest teaching of all. The bridge between patience and complete trust, between waiting for readiness and surrendering to forces larger than individual will. The anxious mind not only wants to control outcomes and timing, it wants to be the captain of every experience, steering consciousness according to its own limited understanding of how things should unfold. But sometimes the deepest peace comes not from better navigation, but from learning when to stop fighting the current and let larger intelligence guide the way. Along the coast of ancient Vietnam, where the South China Sea met land in a maze of inlets, channels, and hidden harbors, there lived a sea captain named Thuy, whose reputation extended from the Mekong Delta to the trading ports of southern China. Thuy commanded a sturdy junk with sails that could catch the faintest breath of wind and a hull deep enough to carry precious cargo safely across waters that claimed lesser vessels regularly. For 15 years, Thuy had navigated these treacherous waters through pure skill and determination. She knew every reef that could tear open a hull, every sandbar that shifted with the monsoon tides, every channel where currents ran contrary to the prevailing flow. Her charts were detailed beyond anything available to other captains, marked with notes about seasonal variations, tide changes, and the subtle signs that indicated when conditions were favorable for different passages. Thuy's approach to seamanship was built on comprehensive preparation and absolute control. Before each voyage, She would spend days studying weather patterns, consulting with local fishermen about current conditions, and calculating precise routes that would minimize risk while maximizing speed. Once at sea, she commanded her crew with exacting precision, adjusting sails by degrees, changing course at the first sign of unfavorable conditions, fighting against any force that threatened to push her vessel off its planned trajectory. This method had served her well for many years. Tui's cargo always arrived on schedule and undamaged. Her crew respected her expertise and trusted her judgment completely. Merchants competed for space on her vessels because they knew their goods would reach their destinations safely. But as Thui entered her 40th year, something began to change in her relationship with the sea that she had spent her life trying to master. The familiar waters started to feel different, more unpredictable, as if currents she had mapped carefully were shifting according to patterns she couldn't decipher. During one voyage that should have been routine, a simple run from the port at Hoi An to the trading center at Saigon with a cargo of silk and ceramics, Tui encountered conditions unlike anything in her extensive experience. The wind died completely just after dawn, leaving her vessel becalmed in waters that should have been flowing with favorable current. Tu consulted her charts and instruments, trying to determine why the sea had become so unnaturally still. According to all her calculations, strong currents should have been carrying them steadily toward their destination, even without wind assistance. But the water around their vessel was mirror calm, reflecting the morning sky like polished bronze. Captain called her first mate, an experienced sailor named Duke, who had been with her crew for over 8 years. Should we deploy the oars? We could make some progress even in these conditions. Thui considered this option, but rejected it quickly. Rowing would be exhausting work in the rising heat of the day, and they would make minimal progress against what she assumed must be contrary currents hidden beneath the still surface. No, she decided. We'll wait for the wind to return. This calm won't last long. But the calm did last. Hours passed with no breath of wind and no movement of current. The sun climbed higher, turning the deck into a furnace that made any physical exertion nearly unbearable. Thui paced restlessly, checking her instruments repeatedly, scanning the horizon for signs of changing weather. By midday, her frustration had transformed into something approaching panic. They were already behind schedule, burning through their water supplies while making no progress toward their destination. The cargo in their hold included perishable goods that would spoil if the voyage took too much longer. Her reputation for reliable delivery was at stake. "We'll use the oars after all," Thui announced to her crew. "Half shifts to prevent exhaustion. We'll row until the wind returns." The crew complied without complaint, but their efforts proved futile. Despite their best attempts, the vessel barely moved. It was as if the sea itself was holding them in place, refusing to allow progress in any direction. The harder they rowed, the more the still water seemed to resist their efforts. By late afternoon, Thui was in a state of desperation that her crew had never witnessed before. She had tried every technique in her considerable arsenal, adjusting their position, changing their heading, deploying different combinations of sail and oar, but nothing worked. They remained trapped in the unnatural calm, as if held by invisible anchors. That evening, as the sun set in spectacular colors that Thui was too agitated to appreciate, an elderly fisherman in a small boat approached their vessel. The old man moved his tiny craft with an ease that seemed impossible given the conditions that had trapped Thui's much larger vessel. "Captain," The fisherman called up to their deck, his weathered face creased with what looked like gentle amusement. "You seem to be having difficulties." Thui's pride bristled at the observation, but her desperation overcame her ego. "The currents have stopped flowing," she called back. "My charts show we should be making good progress in these waters, but we can't move in any direction." The old fisherman smiled and gestured for permission to come aboard. Thui agreed, curious about how his small boat had been able to navigate conditions that had defeated her larger vessel completely. Once on deck, the fisherman introduced himself as Master Nam, though he offered no explanation of what he was master of besides fishing. He examined Thui's charts with interest, but without the reverence that most people showed for her detailed navigation records. "These are very precise," he observed. "You have marked every current, every tide change, every seasonal variation. Very impressive scholarship." "Then you can see why I'm confused," Thui replied, her voice tight with frustration. "According to 15 years of careful observation, we should be making excellent progress through this area. But we're completely stuck." Master Nam nodded thoughtfully, then asked an unexpected question. "When you navigate, do you fight the sea or dance with it?" Thui was puzzled by the question. "I don't understand. I navigate by using skill and knowledge to overcome whatever obstacles the sea presents. I don't dance with anything." "Ah," Master Nam said, as if this explanation had clarified everything. "That's why you're stuck." He walked to the rail and gazed out at the perfectly still water that surrounded them. "The sea is trying to teach you something, but you've been too busy fighting to listen." "The sea doesn't teach," Thui protested. "The sea is just water and current and wind. I've studied it scientifically for years. It follows predictable patterns that can be mapped and understood." Master Nam reached into the small bag he carried and pulled out a handful of flower petals, frangipani blossoms that still held their sweet fragrance despite being separated from their tree. Without explanation, he scattered the petals on the water near their vessel. Thui watched with growing amazement as the petals began to move, not randomly but in a pattern that revealed subtle currents flowing in directions her instruments hadn't detected. The water that had appeared completely still was actually moving in complex spirals and eddies, creating a kind of liquid maze that her vessel had been too large and rigid to navigate. "The current isn't gone," Master Nam explained quietly. "It's dancing. But you've been trying to march through a waltz." Over the next hour, as twilight deepened into night, Master Nam taught Thui to read signs she had never learned to see. The way starlight reflected differently off water, moving in various directions. The subtle sounds that indicated hidden currents. The almost imperceptible movement of floating debris that revealed the sea's true patterns. Most importantly, he taught her to feel the sea's movement through the vessel itself instead of trying to impose her own course against its natural flow. "Stop fighting," he said simply as Thui stood at her ship's wheel. "Feel where the water wants to take you. Then use your sail and rudder not to overpower its movement, but to dance with it." This advice went against everything Thui had learned about seamanship. Her entire approach was built on using superior knowledge and technique to overcome natural forces. The idea of surrendering control to currents she couldn't fully predict felt like professional suicide. But their situation was already desperate, and conventional methods had failed completely. With deep reluctance, Thui began experimenting with Master Nam's approach. Instead of fighting to maintain her planned course, she allowed the vessel to drift with whatever current they encountered, using small adjustments of sail and rudder to guide rather than force their direction. At first, the movement felt random and terrifying. They seemed to be traveling in circles, following currents that led away from their intended destination. But gradually, a larger pattern began to emerge. The seemingly chaotic currents were actually part of a complex but coherent flow that was carrying them toward their destination through a route that no chart had ever mapped. By cooperating with these hidden movements instead of fighting them, they began making faster progress than Thuy had achieved through years of careful route planning. By dawn, they were within sight of Saigon's harbor, having traveled through the night more smoothly than on any voyage in Thuy's experience. The cargo was undamaged, the crew was rested rather than exhausted, and they had actually arrived ahead of their original schedule. "How did you know?" Thuy asked Master Nam as they prepared to part company. "How did you understand the currents when my instruments detected nothing?" The old fisherman smiled and gestured toward his small, simple boat. "I stopped trying to conquer the sea many years ago," he said. "When you fight the water, it fights back. When you listen to it, it shares its secrets." Over the following months, Thuy gradually transformed her entire approach to navigation. She still used her charts and instruments, but now they were tools for listening rather than controlling. Instead of imposing predetermined routes, she learned to feel her way through waters that revealed their patterns only to captains who approached them with respect rather than dominance. Her voyages became faster and more efficient than ever before, but more importantly, they became peaceful. Thuy no longer spent her time at sea in constant tension, battling against forces she couldn't control. She learned to work in partnership with currents and winds, finding routes that served both her purposes and the sea's natural movements. The change affected her crew profoundly. Sailors who had once worked in rigid discipline now moved with fluid responsiveness, adjusting to conditions as they arose rather than following predetermined procedures. The vessel itself seemed to move differently, gliding through waters that had once offered resistance. Thuy's story reveals something crucial about the anxious mind's relationship to control and surrender. Like her original approach to navigation, anxiety often comes from trying to force life to follow our predetermined route instead of learning to work with the currents that are actually flowing. The anxious mind creates detailed charts of how things should unfold, then fights against any deviation from the planned course. It exhausts itself trying to overcome forces that might actually be carrying it toward better destinations than originally imagined. It mistakes surrender for failure, not recognizing that cooperation with larger intelligence often leads to outcomes superior to anything individual control could achieve. Master Nam's teaching about dancing with the sea instead of fighting it points toward one of Buddhism's deepest insights, that peace comes not from imposing our will on experience, but from learning to move harmoniously with forces that are much larger and wiser than our individual understanding. This doesn't mean becoming passive or abandoning all intention. Thuy still had destinations to reach and cargo to deliver safely. But she learned to achieve these goals by working with natural flows rather than against them, by listening to what was actually happening rather than insisting that conditions conform to her expectations. Right now, as you rest in this deepening night, you can practice Thuy's hard-won wisdom. Notice areas of your life where you might be fighting currents instead of learning to dance with them. Relationships that aren't developing according to your timeline. career changes that seem to be taking unexpected directions, personal healing that's following patterns you didn't anticipate. What would it feel like to stop fighting these flows and begin listening to what they might be trying to teach you? What if the detours and delays you've been resisting are actually currents carrying you toward destinations better than anything you originally planned? Your breath demonstrates this wisdom naturally. It doesn't fight against your body's rhythms or demand that oxygen behave according to your preferences. It works in perfect partnership with forces you don't consciously control: your heartbeat, your circulation, your cellular metabolism. Each breath is an act of trust in intelligence that operates beyond your individual will. Buddhist wisdom teaches that life itself is like Master Nam's sea, flowing according to patterns that are too complex for individual minds to fully comprehend, but infinitely wise when approached with respect and openness. The anxiety that keeps you awake often comes from trying to force these patterns to match your limited understanding instead of learning to move gracefully with their natural flow. Tonight, let Tui's surrender guide you toward deeper rest. Stop fighting with your thoughts, demanding that they follow predetermined patterns toward sleep. Instead, learn to feel the natural currents of consciousness as it prepares to let go into dreams. Some nights, sleep comes quickly and directly. Other nights, it approaches through circuitous routes that your conscious mind doesn't understand. Both patterns can carry you safely to rest if you learn to work with them instead of against them. Feel how your body already knows this dance of surrender. Your muscles don't force themselves to relax, they simply stop holding tension when it's no longer needed. Your heartbeat doesn't struggle to slow down, it naturally adjusts to your decreasing activity. Your entire nervous system knows how to shift from active engagement to restorative rest without your conscious management. Trust this intelligence that operates through you but beyond you. Let it guide your awareness into the peaceful depths that await when you stop trying to navigate consciousness with the limited instruments of individual control. The sea of your own awareness has currents that lead to profound rest, but they can only be found by listening rather than commanding. Tonight, let Master Nam's wisdom teach you to dance with the natural flows of your own consciousness, moving in harmony with forces that know exactly how to carry you toward the deep peace you seek. Stop fighting the current of this moment. Feel where your awareness wants to drift. Use the gentle adjustments of attention not to force a particular direction, but to dance gracefully with whatever movements arise. In this surrender, you'll find something far better than the sleep you were trying to control. You'll discover the vast ocean of rest that appears when you finally stop fighting the tide and let larger wisdom carry you home. The deepest hour of night surrounds you now, and your journey through these ancient teachings has been working on levels far below conscious thought. Your breathing has found its most natural rhythm, slow and effortless as mountain streams flowing toward the sea. The tensions you carried when this began have melted like snow in spring sunlight. Your mind has learned to rest in spaces it once filled with endless activity. You've traveled with Chen from marketplace anxiety to mountain peace, discovering that the breath is always available as an anchor in stormy thoughts. You've walked with the monks who showed how to set down burdens that exist only in memory and imagination. You've sat with Wei in his cluttered study and learned how spaciousness itself can heal an overwhelmed consciousness. You've stood with Liu in his fields, watching fortune and misfortune reveal themselves as movements in a story too large for immediate judgment. Now comes the final teaching, one that shows how all these insights flow together into a silence so profound that it transforms not just your sleep, but your understanding of what consciousness itself can become when it stops grasping for anything at all. In the remote mountains of ancient Korea, accessible only by paths that wound through forests of cedar and pine, where morning mist gathered like prayers made visible, there stood a Zen temple known throughout the region, not for the complexity of its teachings, but for their complete absence. The temple was small and simple, built of weathered wood that had been polished silver by countless seasons. Its gardens were spare but perfect, a few carefully placed stones, a single ancient maple tree, a pool of water so still it reflected sky like a mirror made of liquid light. Master Yunmen was the temple's sole teacher, an elderly man whose presence seemed to contain more silence than most libraries contain words. He had been practicing meditation for over 50 years, but unlike many masters who became known for their eloquent Dharma talks or profound commentaries on sacred texts, Master Yunmen had gradually said less and less as the decades passed, until he barely spoke at all. Students traveled from distant provinces to hear his teachings, carrying with them scrolls of questions they hoped to have answered, koans they wanted explained, spiritual problems they needed help resolving. What they found instead was a small, quiet man with eyes like mountain lakes, deep, clear, and somehow refreshing just to look into. He would sit on a simple cushion in the temple's main hall and breathe. Sometimes for minutes, sometimes for hours. The breathing was not a technique or a demonstration. It was simply what was happening, as natural as wind moving through pine branches or water flowing over stones. This frustrated many visitors, especially those who came seeking urgent answers to pressing spiritual questions. They would arrive with backpacks full of problems and concerns, expecting lectures, discussions, detailed instructions, and clear guidance for their meditation practice. Instead, they encountered silence so complete it seemed to have weight and texture, like a presence rather than an absence. On a crisp autumn morning when the maple tree in the temple garden was dropping leaves the color of fire, a young government official named Park arrived at Master Yunmen's temple. Park was 28 years old and had recently been appointed to oversee a large district plagued by corruption, poverty, and conflicts between villages that seemed to escalate with each passing month. Park had been working 18-hour days for 6 months, trying to untangle webs of bribery and favoritism that had been building for decades. He mediated disputes over water rights, grain distribution, and land boundaries. He investigated reports of officials stealing from public funds. He attempted to establish fair taxation systems in communities where the wealthy had been evading payments for years, while the poor shouldered impossible burdens. The weight of responsibility was crushing him in ways he hadn't anticipated when he'd eagerly accepted the appointment. Every decision he made seemed to create 3 new problems. Every corruption he exposed revealed 2 more layers of systematic dishonesty. Every dispute he resolved was replaced by fresh conflicts that seemed even more complex and intractable. Park had been losing sleep for weeks, lying awake at night trying to untangle the implications of various policies and their potential unintended consequences. His mind churned constantly with scenarios and contingencies. Should he take a firm approach with lawbreakers, knowing that strict enforcement might drive underground the corruption he was trying to eliminate? Should he focus on systemic reforms that would take years to show results while people continued to suffer in the present? Should he compromise with existing power structures to achieve incremental progress, or should he risk political backlash by demanding immediate changes? In his desperation for guidance, Park had begun studying Buddhist texts extensively, hoping to find wisdom that would help him govern with both compassion and effectiveness. He had memorized passages about skillful means and compassionate action. He had analyzed treatises on the middle way and its application to political decision-making. He had consulted with various teachers about balancing individual needs with community welfare. But the more he studied, the more confused he became. Different texts offered contradictory advice. Various masters emphasized different approaches. The abundant spiritual information had become another source of anxiety rather than a solution to his problems. "Master Yunmen," Park said as he entered the temple hall, his voice tight with urgency and exhaustion, "I need your wisdom desperately. My province is in chaos. People are suffering while I struggle to determine the right course of action. I have studied extensively about compassionate governance, but I cannot find clear guidance for my specific situation." Park knelt formally and pulled several scrolls from his traveling pack, spreading them carefully on the polished wooden floor. The papers rustled softly in the morning stillness, their neat columns of characters representing months of research and preparation. "I have brought the relevant texts with me, treatises on Buddhist approaches to social justice, commentaries on the relationship between meditation practice and political action, historical examples of enlightened rulers who balanced competing demands successfully. Perhaps we could examine them together and determine the proper Buddhist response to corruption and social unrest." Park looked up expectantly, waiting for Master Yunmen to begin the scholarly discussion he had been anticipating for weeks. But the master simply sat quietly on his cushion, looking out the window where morning light was filtering through the autumn leaves of the maple tree. His breathing was slow and even, his posture upright but relaxed, his hands resting loosely in his lap. Minutes passed in silence. Park waited patiently at first, assuming the master was contemplating the complexity of his questions. The silence stretched, filled only by the distant sound of wind moving through the forest and the occasional call of birds preparing for their southern migration. 07. When a full hour had passed without a word being spoken, Park began to feel restless. "Master," he said, his voice carrying a note of urgency, "surely you have some guidance for me. People in my district are depending on decisions I must make this week. Disputes need resolution. Policies must be implemented. I cannot return empty-handed while my communities suffer." Master Yunmen slowly turned his gaze from the window to Park's face. His eyes held no impatience or judgment, just a quality of attention that seemed to take in everything without grasping at anything. He smiled slightly, an expression so subtle it might have been imagined, but said nothing. Park felt his frustration building like steam in a covered pot. He had traveled for 3 days to reach this remote temple. He had important work waiting for him back in the province. He needed practical advice, not mystical silence. The people he served required action, not meditation. "Master," Park said more forcefully, "with great respect, silence won't solve the problems I'm facing. I need wisdom, not emptiness." The Buddha taught for 45 years, sharing practical guidance for reducing suffering in the world. "Surely you have some teachings to offer someone trying to serve others." Master Yunmen reached slowly for a clay pot that sat beside his cushion and poured tea into 2 simple cups. The liquid was pale green and fragrant with mountain herbs and flowers. He lifted one cup in both hands and drank with obvious appreciation, his eyes half closed as he savored the warmth and flavor. Then he offered the second cup to Park. Park accepted the tea reluctantly, his mind still churning with questions and frustration. But as he lifted the cup to his lips, something subtle began to shift in his awareness. The tea was warm against his mouth, carrying flavors he couldn't immediately identify, grass and flowers, and something mineral that spoke of mountain springs. For a moment, his attention was completely absorbed in the simple act of drinking. He wasn't thinking about grain distribution policies or water rights disputes. He wasn't analyzing competing approaches to corruption or weighing the political implications of various enforcement strategies. He was just drinking tea, fully present with the warmth in his hands and the taste on his tongue. When the cup was empty, Master Yunmen refilled it without being asked. This time, Park noticed the weight of the clay vessel, still warm from the tea. He noticed the steam rising in delicate spirals. He noticed the sound the liquid made as he swallowed. His breathing, which had been shallow and tight since arriving at the temple, began to deepen naturally. They shared tea in this way for the remainder of the morning, sitting in the golden light that streamed through the temple's paper screens. No words were spoken, but something was being transmitted that had nothing to do with language or concepts. Park found that his racing thoughts were beginning to slow like a spinning wheel, gradually losing momentum. By midday, Park realized that for the first time in months, his mind had stopped its constant problem-solving activity. He wasn't replaying yesterday's difficult decisions or rehearsing tomorrow's challenging meetings. He wasn't analyzing policy options or calculating political risks. He was simply present with the immediate reality of sitting in a peaceful temple, breathing mountain air, sharing tea with a man who seemed to embody the very tranquility Park had been seeking through all his studying. "Master," Park said quietly as the afternoon light began to slant lower through the windows, "I came seeking answers to specific questions, but I'm discovering something unexpected. Peace. A stillness I haven't felt in months. How is this possible when none of my problems have been solved?" Master Yunmen set down his empty cup with the same careful attention he had given to every movement throughout the day. He looked at Park with eyes that seemed to contain infinite depth and warmth, then spoke for the first time since the young official's arrival. "When you stop stirring muddy water," he said, his voice carrying the same quality of stillness that characterized his presence, "it becomes clear on its own." These were the only words Master Yunmen spoke during Park's entire visit. But in that simple statement, Park understood something that all his months of studying and analyzing had not taught him. He had been stirring the waters of his mind constantly, thinking, planning, worrying, comparing options, seeking solutions, doubting decisions. The more he stirred, the muddier his thinking became. The more frantically he searched for answers, the more confused and overwhelmed he felt. But in the silence of the temple, he had stopped stirring. And in that stillness, a natural clarity had begun to emerge. Not answers to his specific policy questions, but something more fundamental, a calm awareness that could meet any situation without being overwhelmed by it. Park remained at the temple for 4 more days, sitting in silence with Master Yunmen. They took meals together, worked in the temple garden together, and meditated together, all without extensive conversation. Occasionally, the master would make a brief observation, "The persimmons are ripening," or "Rain comes before evening," but mostly they inhabited a companionable quiet, that seemed to deepen Park's understanding without adding any information to his conscious mind. Each day of silence revealed new layers of peace Park hadn't known existed within him. His breathing continued to deepen and slow. His shoulders, which had been perpetually raised in a posture of defensive readiness, gradually lowered into a more natural position. The knot of anxiety that had taken up permanent residence in his stomach began to dissolve like salt in warm water. More surprisingly, Park began to experience moments of what he could only describe as natural wisdom, insights that arose not from thinking, but from the spacious awareness that remained when thinking stopped. Sitting quietly in the temple garden, watching leaves fall from the ancient maple tree, he would suddenly understand something about balancing competing demands or approaching conflicts with both firmness and compassion. These insights didn't come as thoughts or ideas, but as a kind of direct knowing that felt more reliable than any conclusion he had reached through analysis. When he tried to grasp them with his intellectual mind, they would slip away like water through cupped hands. But when he simply rested in the awareness from which they arose, they remained available as a source of guidance that needed no external validation. When Park finally prepared to return to his duties, he felt fundamentally changed. Not because he had received detailed instructions for handling corruption or specific strategies for resolving conflicts, but because he had discovered the still place within himself from which wise action could arise naturally. Back in his province, Park's approach to leadership was transformed completely. Instead of frantically consulting texts and seeking advice when difficult situations arose, he would first reconnect with the inner stillness he had found in Master Yunmen's presence. From that calm center, appropriate responses would emerge without strain or uncertainty. When village disputes required his attention, instead of immediately imposing solutions based on legal precedents or administrative policies, he would listen deeply to all parties until the underlying issues became clear. Often, he would find that conflicts which appeared complex and intractable were actually simple misunderstandings that dissolved when people felt truly heard. When corruption was discovered, instead of reacting with anger or implementing complicated enforcement mechanisms, he would respond with the kind of firm compassion that emerged from his centered awareness. His actions were decisive, but not harsh, corrective, but not punitive. Park's district gradually became known throughout the region for its unusual harmony and effective governance. Not because he had developed revolutionary new policies or implemented sophisticated administrative systems, but because he had learned to make decisions from stillness rather than anxiety, from wisdom rather than worry. Years later, Park would often return to Master Yunmen's temple, not to seek advice about specific challenges, but to reconnect with the silence that had taught him everything he truly needed to know about leading others and serving the common good. The story of Master Yunmen and Park reveals the deepest secret about anxiety and the restless mind. All the analysis, all the seeking, all the mental effort we invest in trying to solve our problems often prevents the very clarity we're looking for from emerging naturally. Like muddy water that becomes clear when we stop stirring it, consciousness reveals its natural wisdom when it's allowed to settle into stillness. But most of us keep stirring constantly, analyzing our situations, rehearsing conversations, imagining outcomes, seeking more information, comparing options endlessly. The stirring itself maintains the confusion. Master Yunmen's teaching was not silence for its own sake, but an invitation to discover what emerges when the mind stops its constant activity. In that stillness, Park found something more valuable than any specific answer to his governmental problems. He found the source of wisdom itself, the clear awareness that can meet any situation with appropriate response. This is what you've been discovering throughout tonight's journey through these ancient stories. Each teaching has been pointing toward the same fundamental truth. Peace doesn't come from solving all your problems or understanding everything perfectly. It comes from finding the still place within yourself that remains untouched by changing circumstances. Chen learned that this stillness could be accessed through conscious breathing. When his merchant mind stopped racing toward imaginary future problems, he could rest in the simple reality of air moving in and out of his body. The two monks demonstrated that this peace comes from learning not to carry unnecessary burdens. Like Master Jin setting down the woman at the river, you can respond fully to life's actual demands without carrying every interaction forward in memory and imagination. Wei's story showed that wisdom requires not more information, but more space. When his mind was cleared of excessive accumulation, insight could arise spontaneously without being forced or manufactured. Liu the farmer embodied the understanding that peace comes from embracing uncertainty rather than demanding that life conform to our preferences. His patient maybe was another expression of the same stillness that Master Yunmen demonstrated. And now Master Yunmen's wordless teaching reveals how all these practices point toward one destination, the natural clarity of awareness when it's not being constantly disturbed by mental activity. Right now, as you rest in the deepest part of night, you can experience directly what Park discovered in that mountain temple. You don't need to understand every detail of these stories or remember all their lessons. You don't need to analyze their meanings or figure out how to apply their teachings. You can simply stop stirring and let your awareness settle into its natural clarity. Feel how your body has been releasing throughout this night's journey. Your breathing has found its own perfect rhythm, requiring no management from your conscious mind. The places that were tight with accumulated tension have softened like earth after gentle rain. Your mind has been learning to rest in the spaces between thoughts rather than filling every moment with mental activity. This is Master Yunmen's teaching demonstrated through your own direct experience. The peace you've been seeking was never hidden in complex solutions or sophisticated techniques. It was always available in the simple act of stopping the struggle, stopping the analysis, stopping the endless stirring that keeps awareness cloudy. Your breath continues its ancient rhythm without your supervision. Your heart beats steadily without your conscious direction. Your body knows how to heal and rest without your mental management. There is a vast intelligence operating within your being that functions perfectly without constant input from your thinking mind. As you allow yourself to sink deeper into rest, trust this intelligence completely. Trust that your life can unfold appropriately without your mind needing to solve every problem in advance. Trust that wisdom will arise when it's needed, just as it did for Park when he learned to govern from stillness rather than anxiety. The cherry blossoms outside Master Yunmen's temple fell when their time had come. The tea was warm when warmth was what the moment offered. The silence was complete when completeness was what both teacher and student required. Nothing was forced, nothing was rushed. Nothing needed to be different from what it naturally was. Let this be your meditation now as consciousness prepares for sleep, not an effort to achieve anything, but a gentle allowing of what's already happening. Your awareness is settling into quiet depths as naturally as darkness deepens at the end of day. Your mind is learning to rest in the vast stillness that exists beneath all surface activity. There's nothing you need to remember from tonight's teachings. No techniques to practice, no methods to implement, no insights to preserve. The stories have already done their work, planting seeds in deeper layers of your being that will grow according to their own seasons and timing. Like Park returning to his province, you'll carry this stillness with you into tomorrow's activities. Not as something you learned, but as something you remembered, the natural peace that was always available beneath the mental stirring, the clear awareness that can meet any situation without being disturbed by it. Rest now in Master Yunmen's wordless Dharma. Let the night silence be your temple hall. Let your slowing breath be your meditation bell. Let the gradually fading thoughts be like visitors departing after the teaching session has concluded. The teaching is complete. The muddy water is settling. Clarity is emerging naturally, not through effort, but through the profound relief of finally stopping all the unnecessary stirring. Your consciousness knows how to descend into sleep as naturally as rivers flow toward the ocean. This isn't falling away from awareness, but returning to its source, the vast, clear space in which all experience arises and passes away like clouds in an infinite sky. Sleep deeply in this recognition. Rest completely in this understanding. The ancient wisdom lives in you now, not as information, but as the very ground of your being, as natural as breathing, as peaceful as still water, as free as the limitless sky of awareness itself. Let the night carry you into dreams that arise from this stillness, and into a sleep so deep and restorative that when you wake, you'll know something has fundamentally shifted. Not because you learned something new, but because you finally stopped stirring long enough to discover the crystal clarity that was always here, waiting patiently beneath the surface of all your beautiful, unnecessary concern. The water is clear now. The mind is still. The heart is at peace. And in this perfect stillness, everything you ever needed to know reveals itself without words, without effort, without anything at all except the infinite presence that you have always been and will always be. Sleep well, and thank you for joining us here at Sleepy Monk.